The Failstorm raged above Orgrimmar's crimson skies, tearing through the barrier between worlds like claws through parchment. Garrosh Hellscream's war had left the Horde capital vulnerable, its defenses weakened by internal strife and the constant pressure from Alliance forces. Now something far worse descended upon the city of warriors. The Burning Legion had returned, and this time their invasion force materialized not at the Dark Portal, but directly in the heart of the Horde's greatest stronghold. Fell Reavers stomped through the Valley of Strength, their mechanical screams echoing off the iron-clad walls as Fell Guards and Wrath Guards poured from dimensional gateways that burned with sickly green fire. The city's defenders rallied with desperate courage. Kor'kron guards forming shield walls while Horde champions unleashed everything they had against the demonic tide. Vol'jin, newly appointed war chief after Garrosh's defeat, stood atop Grommash Hold, coordinating the defense through a chaos of reports and magical communications. The Troll's tactical mind worked furiously as he directed grunt battalions to reinforce crumbling defensive lines, while Blood Elf Magisters channeled barrier spells to protect civilian evacuation routes. But the numbers were overwhelming. For every demon slain, 3 more emerged from the portals, their ranks including pit lords whose presence alone caused lesser warriors to flee in terror. The air tasted of sulfur and burning metal, punctuated by the screams of the dying and the roar of field cannons reducing entire structures to molten slag. Through the largest portal stepped something that made even the pit lords seem insignificant, a demon of such magnitude that its emergence caused the very ground to crack and bleed. Manaroth, destroyer of the Draenei, enslaver of the Orcish clans, had returned from whatever hell the Legion had banished him to after his previous defeat. The massive Annihilan's presence radiated such malevolence that the bravest warriors felt their courage waver. His laugh shook buildings for blocks in every direction as he surveyed the carnage with eyes that burned with the hatred of 10,000 years. That was when reality tore open again, but differently this time. The new rift carried no feel energies, no demonic taint. Instead, it pulsed with something alien to Azeroth, a power that felt both dark and ordered, chaotic yet controlled. The Void Mages and Warlocks monitoring magical disturbances throughout the city felt their instruments screaming warnings about energies that matched no known classification. Through this anomaly fell a figure in black armor, crashing through the roof of a burning barracks with such force that the entire structure collapsed inward. Dust and debris billowed outward as the figure rose slowly, mechanically, a tattered black cape settling around broad shoulders. The sound cut through the battlefield's cacophony like a blade through flesh. Breathing, mechanical and rhythmic, steady as a funeral drum. Darth Vader had arrived in Azeroth. His respirator cycled twice as he surveyed this new battlefield. Where once he had commanded star destroyers across spiral arms of a distant galaxy, now he stood in a realm soaked in magic, so thick he could feel it pressing against his consciousness. The force flowed here, but twisted, corrupted by energies that spoke of burning crusades and cosmic hunger beyond mortal comprehension. Through gaps in destroyed walls, he glimpsed the sky the color of fresh blood, lit by the sickly green glow of demonic portals. His gloved hand found his lightsaber's familiar grip as he sensed immediate threats approaching. A pack of Fel Guards materialized nearby, their massive forms bristling with Fel-forged weapons and armor that steamed with corrupted energies. These creatures radiated hunger and violence in the Force, their presence like acid against his consciousness. They charged with inhuman speed across the rubble-strewn ground, clawed feet leaving scorched prints in the stones. Vader's lightsaber ignited with its characteristic snap hiss, the crimson blade casting dancing shadows across the destruction as he moved to meet them. His first strike bisected the leading Fel Guard at the waist, the demon's essence shrieking as it was banished back to the twisting nether. The second leaped high, glaive raised for a killing blow, but found only empty air as the Dark Lord sidestepped with fluid precision. His backhand strike removed its horned head in a spray of ichor that sizzled on the cobblestones. The remaining demons pressed their attack with mindless fury, but Vader extended his left hand, and the force responded to his will. 3 Felguards lifted into the air, their bodies convulsing as invisible pressure crushed windpipes that had never drawn mortal breath. He closed his fist, and the demons imploded, their forms dissolving into feel energy that dissipated like morning mist. From the elevated walkways connecting Orgrimmar's different levels, a blood elf warlock named Thalishra Sunweaver watched through demon sight enhanced vision. Her analysis of the stranger's abilities filled her consciousness with contradictions and impossibilities. The weapon defied immediate classification, though its molecular disruption field showed similarities to enchanted blades she had studied. More intriguing was the telekinetic display. Skilled mages could achieve similar effects, but this being showed no signs of arcane exhaustion or mana depletion. His power seemed to flow from a completely different source, one that her extensive knowledge of Azeroth's magical systems could not explain. She activated a communication crystal linked to Vol'jin's command center. Warchief, unknown combatant in the Valley of Strength demonstrating extreme magical capabilities. Classification uncertain, but power level exceeds most of our battle mages. He's eliminating Legion forces with unprecedented efficiency. Through the Force, Vader sensed more threats approaching. A squad of Wrathguards moved through the burning streets with tactical precision, their feel armor scarred by centuries of warfare across countless worlds. These demons were veterans of the Legion's endless crusade, and they moved with the discipline of trained soldiers rather than mindless monsters. Their fel-corrupted weapons tracked methodically across potential firing lanes as they advanced through smoke and flame. The lead Wrathguard raised its massive glaive as it spotted the black-armored figure, and fell energy erupted from runes carved into the weapon's surface. The projectiles howled toward their target, each one designed to penetrate magical barriers before detonating within the victim's body. But Vader's lightsaber moved in precise arcs, intercepting the feel bolts mid-flight. Each deflected projectile sparked against rubble or embedded in walls, their explosive charges detonating harmlessly against already ruined surfaces. The Wrathguards spread into a fighting formation, their synchronized attacks designed to overwhelm any single opponent's defensive capabilities. But Vader had faced similar tactics in countless battles across a different galaxy. He reached out through the Force, grasping one of the massive iron beams that supported Orgrimmar's elevated walkways. With a gesture, he sent the structure crashing down onto the squad's position. Tons of metal and stone cascaded across the demon's armor, seeking gaps in their protection. 2 warriors fell immediately, their connection to the material plane severed by the massive impact. The survivors scattered, but Vader was already among them, his lightsaber carving through fel-forged armor as easily as flesh. Vol'jin coordinated with his advisors through encrypted magical channels. Whatever he be, he eliminating our primary obstacles. I be ordering the Darkspear to establish contact. His accent thickened with concern as he watched the tactical displays showing the stranger's impossible progress through Legion lines. Inadvisable without proper identification protocols, replied Archmage Thalishra, her fingers dancing across scrying crystals. Unknown magic users represent significant corruption risks to standard personnel. The energies he commands are unlike anything in our archives. But Vader had already sensed their approach through the Force. Horde warriors moved with disciplined precision through Orgrimmar's lower levels, their weapons held ready but not yet aimed with killing intent. Their thoughts carried notes of desperate hope rather than immediate hostility. These soldiers served something they called the Horde, a coalition of races united by honor and survival against a hostile world. Their loyalty burned like beacon fires in the Force, reminding him of the dedication he had once inspired in the Empire's finest troops. A Corkron elite guard emerged from behind a cluster of overturned siege equipment, his unit maintaining covering positions. The orc's scarred face showed decades of warfare, but his eyes carried intelligence as well as ferocity. Unknown warrior, identify yourself and state your allegiance. The Horde demands answer. Vader's respirator cycled twice before he responded, his voice carrying the mechanical resonance that had once struck terror into rebel hearts across an entire galaxy. I am Lord Vader. Explain this Horde you serve and the nature of your enemies. The guards exchanged glances, their training warring with instincts that screamed about confronting someone who had just carved through elite Legion demons like wheat before a scythe. The elite guard activated a communication device strapped to his wrist, his deep voice rumbling. War Chief, the unknown be requesting information about the Horde and the Legion, awaiting guidance. Bringing him up would require considerable explanation. Vol'jin's voice crackled through the device. But we be needing every advantage we can get against Manaroth. Tell him the Horde stands for honor and survival, and ask if he stands with us against the Burning Legion's corruption. Through the Force, Vader felt the sincerity in these warriors' determination. Their devotion to their war chief and their people burned with a purity that his service to Palpatine had always lacked. He sensed no deception, only desperate hope that he might prove an ally rather than another enemy in a world that seemed to produce threats from every shadow. Your Horde, he said finally, his respirator cycling between words. Does it rule through strength? Through honor and the will to survive? The elite guard replied, his voice carrying the cadence of deeply held belief. We be outcasts united, fighting for our right to exist. Vol'jin be our war chief, chosen by the spirits themselves to lead us through the darkness. Vader considered this. Another leader, another world, another war between order and chaos. But something felt different here. The Force showed him glimpses of this realm's history, fragments of knowledge drawn from the minds around him. A world tree burning, faction wars that spanned continents, ancient evils that had nearly consumed everything multiple times. An alliance of necessity built on mutual survival rather than fear alone. Show me to your war chief, he commanded. I would know more of this world and its conflicts. The extraction to Vol'jin's command post required navigating 2 kilometers of war-torn city streets and the approaches to Grommash Hold. Vader moved among the Horde forces like a dark avatar of death, his presence shifting the battle's momentum wherever he appeared. When a group of Legion infiltrators attempted to overrun a triage station where shamans worked frantically to save wounded warriors, his Force lightning reduced them to charred corpses before their feel magic could find targets. When a feel reaver burst through the wall of the warriors' training grounds, its massive form crushing buildings beneath its mechanical feet, his telekinetic might seized the construct's legs and twisted them until the entire machine collapsed in a shower of sparks and demonic screaming. Archmage Thalisara documented each display of power with growing fascination and concern. The stranger's abilities defied standard Azerothian classifications while remaining disturbingly effective. His combat protocols showed no signs of field corruption or void taint, yet his power levels exceeded those of many of Azeroth's legendary mages. Most troubling was the weapon itself, which appeared to function through contained plasma held within a magnetic field of completely unknown origin. Nothing in the Kirin Tor's archives or the Blood Elves' extensive magical research suggested such a thing was possible. At Grommash Hold, Vol'jin waited with his most trusted advisors and a direct communication link to Silvermoon and Thunderbluff. The being who entered his hall moved with the measured stride of absolute authority, cape flowing behind him like shadow given form. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to commanding armies and conquering planets. War Chief Vol'jin, Vader acknowledged, having plucked the name from nearby thoughts. Tell me of your world and its conflicts. Vol'jin gestured to a massive tactical display showing Azeroth's continents and the various threat markers scattered across them. Azeroth be a world under constant siege, stranger. We faced a burning legion, an army of demons that seek to consume all worlds. We faced the old gods, ancient evils imprisoned beneath the earth that whisper madness to any who listen. We faced the Scourge, armies of undead commanded by the Lich King in Northrend. And we face each other, horde and alliance, in conflicts born of mistrust and old wounds. Through the Force, Vader examined the scope of what they described. Multiple existential threats, each one capable of ending civilizations. Factions divided when unity might serve them better. A world that seemed designed to generate conflict at every level of existence. The scale was smaller than his former empire, but the intensity of the struggle was perhaps even greater. Your war chief leads through consensus rather than absolute authority, Vader observed, reading the political dynamics from the minds around him. An interesting choice given the magnitude of threats you face. The horde be made of many peoples, Vol'jin replied, his tusks gleaming as he spoke. Orcs, trolls, Tauren, blood elves, goblins, and now even the undead forsaken. We be strongest when all voices be heard, when honor guides our actions rather than fear. Before Vader could respond, proximity alarms shrieked throughout the hold. Every magical detection system in Orgrimmar screamed warnings as an absolutely massive demonic presence made itself known. Through the reinforced viewports, they watched as Manaroth rose to his full, terrible height, his hooves crushing buildings as he waded through the city toward Grommash Hold. The Pit Lord's voice shook the very foundations of the structure as he bellowed his challenge. Orcs, I have returned to reclaim what is mine. Your blood, your souls, your world, all will burn in the Legion's name. Every warrior in the command center felt their courage waver as Manaroth's aura of terror washed over them. This was the demon who had enslaved the entire Orcish race with his cursed blood, who had slaughtered Draenei by the thousands, who had broken armies and shattered worlds for millennia. His power made the previous demonic incursion seem like a mere scouting party. All forces, fall back to fortified positions, Vol'jin ordered, his voice strained but steady. Prepare for concentrated magical bombardment. Contact Dalaran and request immediate assistance from Dakiran Tor. Your bombardment will fail, Vader stated with mechanical certainty, studying the demon through the Force. Creatures of this magnitude require direct confrontation by champions of equivalent power. Mon, that thing has destroyed entire armies, Vol'jin protested. Even our greatest champions, even Thrall himself might not. Vader's Force grip closed around the war chief's throat, just enough to interrupt him, not enough to harm, but sufficient to demonstrate the futility of argument. I have faced gods before, War Chief. This demon is merely another obstacle to be removed. He released Vol'jin and turned toward the hall's exit. Behind him, he could sense the mixture of fear and desperate hope radiating from the Horde leaders. They had never encountered anyone who spoke of confronting Pit Lords as if they were merely another tactical problem to be solved. Manaroth had begun his rampage through Orgrimmar's commercial districts, each swing of his glaive shearing through iron and stone as easily as flesh. His hoofed feet left craters in the cobblestones, and where his blood dripped, the ground itself seemed to burn with fell corruption. Horde defenders who got too close found themselves overcome by bloodlust and rage, turning their weapons on their own comrades as Manaroth's corrupting influence drove them mad. Vader approached through the city's main thoroughfare, his presence causing spontaneous horde formations to part like water before a ship's prow. Citizens fleeing the demon's approach stopped to stare at this dark figure moving against the flow of refugees, his cape billowing with each measured step. Some whispered prayers to the ancestors, others made warding signs against evil, but all sensed that something momentous was about to unfold. Manaroth noticed him when they were still a kilometer apart. His demonic sight pierced through smoke and flame to focus on this black armored figure who radiated power in frequencies that set his fangs on edge. Here was something that did not belong to this world's established patterns, a presence that spoke of different wars and alternative darknesses. "Mortal!" The demon's voice shattered every window within 3 city blocks. "You reek of unfamiliar suffering. The Legion will enjoy adding your essence to our ranks." Vader's lightsaber ignited in response, its crimson blade casting bloody light across the destruction around them. "You know nothing of suffering, demon. Allow me to educate you." Manaroth launched himself forward with inhuman speed, his massive wings propelling him across the distance between them in seconds. His glaive, forged from the essence of conquered worlds, descended toward Vader's head with force enough to split mountains. But the Dark Lord was no longer where the blow was aimed. He sidestepped at the last instant, his lightsaber carving a burning line across the demon's armored thigh as momentum carried the Pit Lord past him. Fell blood sizzled on the cobblestones where it fell, eating through stone like acid. Manaroth spun with impossible agility for something so massive, his wing buffet creating a shockwave that shattered nearby structures. But the Force guided Vader's movements, and he leaped 30 meters straight up, landing on a reinforced tower's jutting balcony. From this elevation, he could see the full scope of the demon's rampage. Fires burned across a dozen city blocks, their smoke forming spirals that seemed to reach toward the still open Legion portals above. Horde forces maintained their perimeters, but could offer no meaningful resistance to a creature of this magnitude. Manaroth's wings carried him up toward Vader's position, glaive ready to bisect this arrogant mortal who dared stand against the Legion's chosen champion. But as he approached, Vader reached out through the Force and grasped the tower's structural supports. With a thought, he collapsed the entire structure, thousands of tons of iron and stone crashing down onto the demon's head and shoulders. Lesser creatures would have been crushed instantly, but Manaroth's demonic essence allowed him to shrug off physical damage that would destroy even ancient dragons. He emerged from the rubble with his armor barely scratched, though his roar carried a note of genuine fury. The demon had not been forced to exert himself like this in centuries, and this mortal's tactics reminded him uncomfortably of encounters with the most skilled demon hunters. Vader had used the demon's momentary disorientation to leap to another building, this one crowned with a massive siege weapon that the Horde had been preparing to deploy against the Legion portals. The war machine's mechanisms groaned as he reached out through the Force and began manipulating its components, turning the weapon into something far more lethal than its designers had ever intended. When Manaroth launched himself toward this new position, Vader released his hold on the machinery. The massive projectile fired with such force that it tore free from its mounting, the enormous spear moving at supersonic speed directly toward the demon's center mass. The impact drove Manaroth back toward the ground, the blessed steel piercing through his frail armor and drawing a fountain of corrupted blood. A second projectile took him in the shoulder, and a third embedded itself in his wing joint. But Pit Lords were not so easily destroyed. Manaroth's wounds began healing almost immediately, his connection to the twisting nether providing endless reserves of malevolent energy. He landed heavily among the ruins of the commercial district and raised his glaive toward the blood-red sky, drawing on powers that had terrified mortals since the universe was young. "Witness the Legion's true power," he bellowed, and the very air began to burn with unleashed feel energy. The demon's influence reached out across Orgrimmar, touching every heart that beat with rage or desperation. Horde warriors found their discipline cracking as they turned their weapons on fellow soldiers, their minds consumed by artificial bloodlust. Even the shamans and priests felt their control slipping as pure aggression flooded through spiritual connections to the elements and their ancestors. Vader felt the demon's influence pressing against his consciousness like a tide of molten brass. But where others succumbed to mindless rage, his anger was cold, focused, refined by years of Sith training and decades of wielding the dark side. The Force flowed through him like liquid nitrogen, freezing his fury into a weapon more precise than any blade. He dropped from the building and began walking toward Manaroth across the corpse-strewn street. With each step, his power in the Force intensified. Fel-corrupted streetlights exploded in showers of sparks. Vehicle hulks began lifting into the air around him, drawn by invisible currents of telekinetic energy. The very ground cracked beneath his feet as the weight of his dark presence pressed down upon reality itself. Manaroth sensed the shift in their confrontation and charged with desperate fury, his glaive trailing fell fire as he sought to end this battle through overwhelming violence. But Vader was ready. He raised both hands, and Force lightning erupted from his fingertips in torrents of pure destruction. The electrical discharge struck Manaroth full in the chest, its energy pattern unlike anything the demon had encountered in 10,000 years of warfare. This was not fell lightning or arcane electricity or even the holy wrath of Draenei Vindicators. This was something darker, colder, drawn from emotions that even demons found alien and disturbing. The Pit Lord's advance staggered as Force lightning coursed through his demonic essence. His fel armor began to buckle and melt under the sustained electrical assault. More importantly, the energy was disrupting his connection to the twisting nether, the source of his power and immortality. For the first time in millennia, Manaroth felt something approaching genuine fear. Vader advanced through his own lightning storm, his respirator's rhythm never faltering as destruction flowed around him like a second atmosphere. When he was close enough, he dropped the Force lightning and his lightsaber found the gap where the demon's neck met his massive shoulder, slicing through demonic flesh and corrupted armor with surgical precision. Manaroth's death scream shattered every intact window in a 5-kilometer radius as his essence dissolved back into the twisting nether. The creature's connection to the material plane had been severed not just by violence, but by a form of power it could neither understand nor effectively counter. As his form dispersed into rapidly dissipating feel energy, the demon's last sensation was of being consumed by a darkness far more ancient and patient than the Legion's endless hunger. Silence fell across the devastated district, broken only by the steady rhythm of mechanical breathing and the distant sound of collapsing buildings. Vader stood in the crater where Manaroth had made his final stand, cape settling around him like the wings of some primordial destroyer. Steam rose from his lightsaber's blade as demon ichor evaporated from its surface. From hidden positions throughout the area, Horde forces watched in stunned silence. They had just witnessed a single warrior defeat a Pit Lord in direct combat, something that typically required armies or the intervention of legendary heroes wielding artifacts of immense power. Yet this stranger had accomplished the feat with a combination of tactical brilliance and raw power that defied their understanding of both warfare and magic. Through his command center's scrying network, Vol'jin watched the aftermath of the confrontation with growing unease. The stranger's power was undeniable, potentially greater than any single individual currently serving the Horde. But power without proper understanding or loyalty had historically led to catastrophe on a planetary scale. He activated his communication link to Silvermoon City and Dalaran, knowing that this situation required wisdom beyond his own. Leaders of the Horde and those who watch over Azeroth's magical balance. He spoke carefully into the enchanted crystal. We be having a situation that requires immediate assessment. A being of unknown origin has appeared in Orgrimmar and eliminated Manaroth himself. His power be unlike anything in our experience, and we be needing to decide if he be potential ally or threat. But Vader had already begun moving toward the city's elevated levels, drawn by his growing understanding of this world's power structures. Through the Force, he had sensed other minds watching the battle, minds that radiated authority and knowledge far beyond the common soldiers. Someone with actual power was evaluating him, deciding whether he represented an opportunity or a threat to their established order. In the floating city of Dalaran, suspended above the Crystal Song Forest by magic older than most civilizations, Archmage Khadgar reviewed the battle recordings with growing concern. His centuries of experience studying magic across multiple worlds and dimensions had exposed him to every form of power manifestation known to Azeroth scholars. But this stranger's abilities defied standard classification in ways that troubled him deeply. "Jaina, what's your assessment?" he asked the woman standing beside him, her white hair and haunted eyes marking her as someone who had witnessed too much tragedy for one lifetime. Jaina Proudmoore, Lord Admiral of Kul Tiras and former leader of Theramore, studied the scrying images with the analytical precision that had made her one of Azeroth's greatest mages. His power readings exceed anything in the Kirin Tor's archives, yet show none of the traditional markers of field corruption, void taint, or old god influence. The weapon alone represents technology we can't begin to replicate, and his telekinetic capabilities suggest either a completely unknown school of magic or something else entirely. "The way he moved," Khadgar murmured, rewatching the moment when Vader had executed Manaroth. "That was not the casting of spells or the channeling of arcane energies. It was as if the power simply obeyed him. No incantations, no reagents, no apparent mana expenditure." Jaina nodded slowly, her fingers tracing complex patterns in the air as she analyzed the recorded magical signatures. "Whatever he is, he's not from Azeroth. The question becomes, is he a potential ally against the Legion and the other threats we face, or just another danger we'll eventually need to contain?" Through the Force, Vader sensed their scrutiny even across the distance between Orgrimmar and Dalaran. These Watchers carried themselves with the authority of those who had faced and overcome threats that would break lesser minds. They would come for him soon, armed with questions and techniques refined over centuries of dealing with magical anomalies and potential world-ending threats. Let them come. He had served one empire already, had learned the rhythms of power and the prices demanded by absolute authority. If this new realm required him to prove his worth through examination or trial, so be it. The galaxy had changed, but the fundamental equations of power remained constant. The strong guided, the weak followed. Everything else was merely detail. As the Legion portals above Orgrimmar began to collapse, their demonic energies disrupted by the loss of Manaroth's anchoring presence, Vader made his way through the city's middle levels. The orcs, trolls, and other races he passed reacted to his presence with a mixture of awe and terror. Some dropped to their knees in gestures that reminded him of Imperial protocol. Others fled into side passages to avoid his notice. Their reactions told him much about this world's power structures and the psychology of its people. He found what he sought in the Valley of Spirits, a district of Orgrimmar where the trolls maintained their cultural and spiritual centers. Here stood a massive tent that served as both a place of worship and a repository of lore, where troll elders maintained oral histories stretching back thousands of years. At the structure's heart, a shaman named Zentabra knelt before a spirit shrine, her prayers interrupted by the shadow that fell across her meditation. "You carry great power, Dark One," she said without turning, her voice carrying the musical accent of the Darkspear. "But also great pain. The spirits be whispering of your arrival for many moons now, though they not be understanding what you truly are." Vader's respirator cycled twice as he studied the shrine and the totems arranged around it. Through the Force, he could feel the energies these objects channeled, connections to what the locals called elemental spirits and ancestral wisdom. It reminded him of certain Force traditions he had encountered in his previous life, monks and mystics who drew power from similar sources of natural energy. "Your spirits speak of my arrival?" he asked, genuine curiosity coloring his mechanical voice. "What do they say?" Zentabra rose and turned to face him, her tusks gleaming in the shrine's firelight. Her eyes, ancient and knowing despite her relatively young appearance, studied him with the gaze of one who had looked beyond the veil between life and death many times. They say a great darkness be coming, but not the darkness of the Legion or the old gods. A darkness that be both ending and beginning, destruction and purpose intertwined. They say you be searching for something, but not knowing what it be. Through the Force, Vader sensed the truth in her words. Since arriving in this realm, he had felt something calling to him, a resonance that suggested purpose beyond mere survival. This world was broken in ways that reminded him of the galaxy he had left behind. Factions divided when unity might serve them better. Threats that required strength and vision to overcome. Perhaps his arrival here was not mere accident. "Tell me of your world's history," he commanded, settling into a meditative stance. "Everything. The rise of your races, the wars you have fought, the powers that threaten you. I would understand this realm completely." What followed was hours of discussion, with Zen Tabra sharing the deep lore of Azeroth while Vader absorbed information with the focus of someone trained to analyze strategic situations from incomplete data. He learned of the Titans who had shaped the world, of the old gods they had imprisoned, of the Burning Legion's endless crusade to consume all life. He heard tales of the First Horde's corruption and redemption, of alliance betrayals and reconciliations, of dragon aspects and ancient night elves, and wars that had reshaped continents. But more than facts and dates, he absorbed the underlying patterns. Azeroth was a world perpetually on the brink of destruction, saved time and again by champions who rose to face impossible odds. Yet those champions often fell to corruption, pride, or the weight of their own power. The cycle repeated endlessly. Hero rises, hero falls. New hero emerges to face the consequences. It was a pattern begging to be broken. "Your world suffers from a lack of order," Vader observed when Zen Tabra finished her recitation. "Power exists in abundance, but without proper direction. Your factions war among themselves while greater threats gather strength. Your champions fight individually rather than as a unified force." "Perhaps," the shaman acknowledged. "But who could unite such different peoples? The Horde and Alliance be barely holding together within themselves. The idea of both joining under one banner." She shook her head. "It be a dream many have died for, but never achieved." "Because they lacked the strength to impose it," Vader stated flatly, "or the vision to see beyond old grievances and petty conflicts. Your world requires a leader who understands that order and unity are not achieved through hope and faith alone, but through demonstrated power and unwavering purpose." Before Zen Tabra could respond to this troubling statement, a shimmer of arcane energy announced new arrivals. Jaina Proudmoore materialized in the shrine's entrance, flanked by Kirin Tor battle mages whose hands already glowed with prepared spells. Behind them stood Vol'jin himself, accompanied by his most trusted guards and advisors. "Lord Vader," Jaina said, her voice carrying both authority and caution. "I am Jaina Proudmoore, representative of Dalaran and the Kirin Tor. Your actions against the Legion invasion have earned you a measure of respect, but your presence here raises questions that demand answers. We would speak with you about your origins, your powers, and your intentions regarding Azeroth." Vader turned slowly to face her, his respirator cycling as he studied the assembled group through the Force. Jaina radiated power and pain in equal measure, her soul scarred by losses that would have broken lesser minds. Vol'jin carried the weight of leadership with admirable dignity, though doubt about his decisions gnawed at him constantly. The battle mages were competent but nervous, aware that their prepared spells might prove inadequate against someone who had eliminated Manaroth alone. "You seek answers," he said finally, "yet you arrive prepared for battle. Your words speak of respect while your actions suggest fear. Which is the truth, Lady Proudmoore?" Jaina had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, though her stance remained defensive. We have learned through hard experience that unknown power often brings catastrophe. Azeroth has faced too many would-be saviors who revealed themselves as tyrants or vessels for greater evils. We must ensure you represent no such threat. A reasonable precaution, Vader acknowledged. I will answer your questions, but know this. I do not respond to threats or demands. If you wish my cooperation, you will treat me as what I am, a potential ally of considerable power, not a prisoner to be interrogated at your convenience. The statement hung in the air as Vol'jin and Jaina exchanged glances. They both recognized truth when they heard it. This being could not be compelled or contained through conventional means. Their only option was cooperation or conflict, and conflict would likely prove devastating regardless of who ultimately prevailed. Very well, Jaina agreed, dismissing her battle mages with a gesture. Let us speak as equals, Lord Vader. Tell us who you are and what you seek in our world. What followed was a carefully edited version of Vader's history. He spoke of coming from a realm far beyond their world, a galaxy torn by civil war between order and chaos. He described his service to an empire that had sought to bring stability to countless worlds, and the conflicts that had defined his existence. He did not mention his fall to the dark side or the atrocities committed in the Empire's name, but neither did he pretend to be a hero. He presented himself as he was, a warrior who understood that true peace required strength, that order demanded sacrifice, and that the galaxy's fundamental nature was conflict tempered only by superior force. And what do you want from Azeroth? Vol'jin asked when Vader finished. Why stay here when you could seek a way back to your own galaxy? Vader's respirator cycled as he considered the question. Through the Force, he had already sensed that returning to his original galaxy would require power and resources beyond anything readily available in this realm. More importantly, he had begun to sense opportunity here, a world that desperately needed the kind of order he had once helped impose across thousands of systems. Return may not be possible, he stated, and perhaps it is not necessary. Your world faces threats that will consume it without proper leadership. Your Horde and Alliance waste resources fighting each other while the Burning Legion, the Old Gods, and countless other dangers grow stronger. I offer what your world has lacked: the vision and strength to unite your factions against common enemies. You speak of conquest, Jaina said sharply, frost beginning to form in the air around her hands. Of imposing your will upon peoples who have fought for centuries to maintain their freedom and independence. I speak of survival, Vader countered, his mechanical voice cutting through her indignation. How many times has your world nearly fallen to the Legion? How many cities have burned because the Horde and Alliance could not set aside their grievances long enough to present a unified defense? Your freedom means nothing if you lack the strength to preserve it against those who would take everything from you. Vol'jin's tusks gleamed as he considered Vader's words. The Troll war chief had seen enough warfare to recognize uncomfortable truth when he heard it. The Horde's conflicts with the Alliance had indeed weakened both factions, making them vulnerable to external threats. But the idea of submitting to the authority of an unknown outsider, no matter how powerful, went against everything the Horde represented. We be understanding your point, Vol'jin said carefully, but the Horde not be built on submission to powerful individuals. We tried that with Garrosh, and it nearly destroyed us from within. We be a coalition of free peoples, and that freedom be worth fighting for. Even if that fight leaves you too weak to face the true threats, Vader pressed. Your Garrosh failed, not because he was too strong, but because he lacked the wisdom to channel that strength properly. Power without purpose breeds tyranny. Purpose without power breeds empty idealism. Your world requires both in equal measure. Before the debate could continue, a massive explosion rocked Orgrimmar's northern districts. Magical alarms shrieked through the city as new portals began opening. But these carried different energies than the Legion's field corruption. These portals radiated cold, death, and the stench of decay. Through them poured skeletal warriors in rusted armor, their empty eye sockets burning with unholy light. The Scourge had chosen this moment of weakness to launch their own assault. Perfect timing, Jaina muttered bitterly, her hands already weaving complex patterns as she prepared teleportation magic. The Lich King must have sensed the Legion's defeat and decided to capitalize on our exhaustion. Vol'jin, we need to coordinate defensive positions immediately. Already on it, the war chief replied, barking orders into his communication crystal. All available forces to northern defenses. Shamans, purge the undead corruption. Warriors, form shield walls and hold them at the entry points. Vader observed their practiced coordination with approval. These leaders might disagree on philosophy, but they knew how to respond to immediate threats with admirable efficiency. However, efficiency alone might not be sufficient against an enemy as relentless as undead forces that felt no fear and required no rest. I will eliminate their command structure, he announced, already moving toward the city's exit. Direct me to their strongest champion and I will remove their tactical advantage. Jaina started to protest, but Vol'jin raised a hand to stop her. He'd be right. If Daze be Scourge, they'd be following a commander of significant power. Removing the leadership might cause the rest to fall into disarray. He activated a scrying spell, his hands glowing with shamanistic energy as he searched for the focal point of the undead invasion. The image that formed in the air before them showed a Death Knight of terrible power riding a skeletal mount through Orgrimmar's streets. His armor was a masterwork of dark craftsmanship, forged from the bones of dragons and etched with runes that pulsed with necromantic energy. His greatsword Frostmourne crackled with soul-stealing magic as he carved through Horde defenders with contemptuous ease. But it was not the Lich King himself. This was one of his Death Knight commanders, a champion raised from the grave specifically to lead Scourge assaults against major cities. Thessarian, Jaina identified him with grim recognition, one of the most powerful Death Knights to serve the Lich King. He was once a human paladin who fell defending Lordaeron. Now he commands legions of undead with tactical brilliance and personal power that rivals the greatest warriors of the living. Then he will serve as an adequate test, Vader replied, already moving through the shrine's exit. His cape billowed behind him as he strode toward the sounds of combat echoing through Orgrimmar's northern sectors. The battle he found was brutal and desperate. Horde warriors formed shield walls against endless waves of undead, their weapons rising and falling in mechanical rhythm as they fought to hold key choke points. Shamans called upon the elements to burn away corrupted flesh, while Blood Elf priests channeled holy light to banish particularly powerful undead constructs. But for every skeleton or ghoul destroyed, two more emerged from the portals, and Thessarian's presence on the battlefield inspired his troops to greater ferocity. The Death Knight moved through combat like a force of nature, his runeblade harvesting souls with each swing. Frost magic erupted from his free hand, freezing defenders solid before his weapon, shattered them into crystalline fragments. His mount trampled those who fell, its hooves leaving trails of blight that sapped the strength from any living thing they touched. Vader approached through a side street, using the Force to mask his presence from the undead's supernatural senses. He observed Thessarian's fighting style, noting the way the Death Knight combined martial skill with necromantic magic, the patterns of his attacks, and the blind spots in his awareness. This champion was formidable, but he relied heavily on the psychological advantage his terrifying presence provided. Remove that advantage, and his tactical options narrowed considerably. The Dark Lord emerged from shadow directly behind Thessarian's position, his lightsaber igniting with its signature snap hiss. The Crimson Blade caught the Death Knight's attention immediately, and he wheeled his mount around to face this new threat. Another champion steps forward to die. Thessarian's voice carried the hollow quality of one who had forgotten what life felt like. The Lich King will be pleased to add your strength to his armies. Such power should not be wasted on the living. Vader's respirator cycled twice. I have faced death before, Knight. It holds no terror for one who has already embraced the darkness. The Thessarian charged, his skeletal mount moving with unnatural speed across the blood-slicked cobblestones. Frostmourne descended in an arc designed to harvest Vader's soul and bind it to eternal service. But the lightsaber met the cursed blade in a shower of sparks that illuminated the battlefield like lightning. For a moment, the two weapons locked together, necromantic magic straining against focused plasma and the power of the Force. Then Vader demonstrated why mere physical weapons, even legendary ones, could not stand against a lightsaber wielded by a master of the dark side. His blade began cutting through Frostmourne's enchanted steel, the molecular disruption field severing magical bonds that had held for decades. The Thessarian felt his weapon weakening and disengaged, his mount leaping backward to create distance. Impossible, the Death Knight hissed, staring at the glowing scar across Frostmourne's blade. This weapon has harvested thousands of souls. No mortal blade can damage it. I am no mortal, Vader replied, advancing with mechanical precision, and your understanding of power is limited by your master's narrow vision. The duel intensified as the Thessarian abandoned his reliance on Frostmourne's intimidation factor and began fighting with the skill that had made him a legendary paladin before his fall. He wove necromantic magic between sword strikes, summoning waves of frost and shadow to supplement his physical attacks. Undead reinforcements materialized around them, forming a circle of skeletal warriors that closed in to overwhelm Vader through sheer numbers. But the Dark Lord had fought in situations like this countless times. His lightsaber became a crimson blur, carving through undead constructs while his free hand directed force lightning at clustered targets. Skeletons exploded into bone fragments as telekinetic pressure crushed them from within. Ghouls found themselves hurled through the air to impact against buildings with bone-shattering force. And through it all, Vader advanced steadily toward the Thessarian, each step bringing him closer to ending the Death Knight's command. The Thessarian realized he was outmatched and made a desperate gambit. He drove Frostmourne into the ground and channeled every ounce of necromantic power he possessed into a single spell. The temperature plummeted as ice began forming across everything within 100 meters, freezing Horde defenders and undead alike into crystalline statues. At the spell's center, Vader found himself encased in a block of enchanted ice designed to contain even the most powerful beings. For a moment, silence fell across the battlefield as both sides watched to see if the Death Knight's ultimate technique had succeeded. The Thessarian withdrew Frostmourne from the cobblestones, breathing heavily despite his undead nature's lack of need for air. Even the mighty fall before the Lich King's power, he declared, though his voice carried an edge of uncertainty. Then cracks began spreading across the ice's surface, accompanied by a sound like breaking glass amplified 1,000-fold. The force surged outward from Vader's position, shattering the magical ice into billions of harmless fragments that caught the light like diamonds. He emerged from the cloud of glittering dust, his armor unmarked, his lightsaber still burning with crimson intensity. "Your magic is impressive," Vader stated, his respirator's rhythm never having faltered. "But you face power beyond your comprehension." He extended both hands and force lightning erupted with unprecedented intensity, arcing across the distance between them to strike the Thessarian directly in the chest. The Death Knight's armor, forged to resist holy magic and blessed weapons, proved inadequate against energies that operated on completely different principles. The lightning coursed through his undead form, disrupting the necromantic energies that sustained his existence. The Thessarian dropped to his knees as his connection to the Lich King wavered and weakened. For the first time in years, he felt something approaching his original humanity, memories of his life as a paladin surfacing through the veil of undeath. He looked up at the dark figure approaching him and recognized something familiar in that mechanical breathing and absolute confidence. You are like him," the Thessarian gasped. "Like the Lich King. Power without mercy, darkness without redemption." Vader's lightsaber descended, and the Death Knight's head separated from his shoulders in a clean strike. The undead body collapsed, and instantly the Scourge forces throughout Orgrimmar began faltering. Without their commander's will to direct them, the lesser undead reverted to mindless aggression, making them easy targets for the reorganized Horde defenders. As Vader deactivated his weapon, he considered the Thessarian's final words. The Death Knight had been partially correct. Vader did embody power and darkness, but unlike the Lich King, he understood that power required purpose beyond mere domination. The undead empire was doomed to failure because it sought only to expand itself, creating nothing but more death in an endless cycle. True power required vision, the ability to build as well as destroy. Vol'jin arrived with reinforcements as the last pockets of undead resistance were being eliminated. The war chief surveyed the destruction with grim satisfaction before turning his attention to Vader. "You be eliminating two of Azeroth's greatest threats in a single day. The Horde be in your debt, Lord Vader. Whatever our philosophical differences, your actions speak to your effectiveness." "Debt is unnecessary," Vader replied. "I eliminated threats that would have complicated my presence here. Consider it an investment in future cooperation." Jaina materialized nearby, having finished coordinating the magical cleanup of necromantic corruption from the city's northern districts. Her expression was thoughtful as she studied Vader, clearly reassessing her initial judgment. "Your power is undeniable, and your combat prowess exceeds anything I've witnessed outside of Azeroth's legendary figures. But power alone doesn't answer the fundamental question: what do you truly want from this world?" Vader turned to face both leaders, his cape settling around him as his respirator cycled. "I want what any being of vision wants, to see potential fulfilled rather than wasted. Your world possesses resources and power sufficient to dominate this entire region of space, yet you squander it on internal conflicts and defensive wars. The Burning Legion should have been eliminated millennia ago. The Scourge should never have been allowed to establish itself in Northrend. The old gods should have been destroyed rather than merely imprisoned." "Easy to say," Vol'jin countered. "Harder to do when you be facing threats that can corrupt even the strongest minds and the most disciplined armies. Which is why you require leadership that cannot be corrupted," Vader stated. "I have already faced and resisted temptations that broke lesser beings. The dark side of the Force is my servant, not my master. I can provide the unity and direction your world needs without falling to the same corruption that has claimed your previous would-be saviors." The implications of what he was suggesting hung heavy in the air. Jaina's eyes widened as she fully grasped his meaning. "You're talking about uniting the Horde and Alliance under your command, about restructuring Azeroth's entire political and military framework with yourself at its center. That's insane. The amount of resistance you'd face from both factions would trigger civil wars that could destroy everything we've built. Unless I demonstrate that unity under my leadership provides better results than your current system," Vader countered. "Your people follow strength, Lady Proudmoore. Show them strength combined with victory, and they will follow willingly." Before either leader could respond, a massive presence made itself known across the entirety of Azeroth. Every mage, shaman, priest, and warlock felt it simultaneously. A psychic pressure so intense it caused weaker practitioners to collapse unconscious. Across oceans and continents, from the peaks of Mount Hyjal to the depths of Vashj'ir, every being sensitive to magical energies felt the attention of something vast and ancient turning toward a single point in space and time. In Dalaran, Khadgar's hands shook as he traced the source of the disturbance. "By the Titans," he whispered. "Someone's opened a direct connection to Icecrown Citadel. The Lich King himself is manifesting in Orgrimmar." Reality tore open above Grommash Hold as a portal of absolute cold materialized in defiance of every ward and defensive spell the Horde had established. Through it stepped a figure in armor that seemed to absorb light itself, crowned with a helm of dark metal from which emanated waves of pure necromantic power. The Lich King had come personally to Orgrimmar, abandoning his frozen throne for the first time in years, drawn by reports of the being who had eliminated Thessarian with such ease. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of millions of tortured souls bound to his will. So, the anomaly that has disrupted my carefully laid plans reveals itself at last. I felt you arrive in this world, outsider. Your power is intriguing, unfamiliar. I would know what manner of being could eliminate my champions as if they were mere foot soldiers. Vader looked up at the towering figure of Arthas Menethil, the fallen paladin who had become the Scourge's master. Through the Force, he sensed layer upon layer of corruption and power, a consciousness that had been twisted by decades of wielding Frostmourne and sitting upon the frozen throne. This was not simply a powerful Death Knight, this was something approaching a god of death itself, sustained by the collective suffering of countless souls. "I am Darth Vader," he replied, his mechanical voice carrying clearly despite the Lich King's overwhelming presence. "And you have made a mistake coming here personally. Your Scourge armies I could fight for years without seriously threatening your power base. But you, standing before me now, represent an opportunity to end your threat permanently." The Lich King's laugh was the sound of breaking ice and dying screams. "You believe you can destroy me, outsider? I am eternal. I am the end of all living things. I have consumed champions, dragons, and even aspects of the Titans themselves. What are you compared to such power?" "I am inevitable," Vader stated, igniting his lightsaber. What happened next would be remembered in Horde and Alliance legends for generations. The duel between Darth Vader and the Lich King raged across Orgrimmar's upper levels, two absolute powers clashing with a ferocity that shattered buildings and rewrote local reality. Arthas wielded Frostmourne with the skill of someone who had spent decades mastering its cursed power, each strike designed to harvest Vader's soul and add his strength to the Scourge. Necromantic magic erupted from his free hand, waves of death and ice that would have instantly killed lesser beings. But Vader had spent a lifetime learning to channel the dark side, to transform negative emotions into focused power. His lightsaber met Frostmourne again and again, each clash sending shockwaves through the Force and Azeroth's magical field simultaneously. He used the environment ruthlessly, collapsing structures onto the Lich King, hurling vehicles and siege equipment with telekinetic force, channeling Force lightning with an intensity that made his previous displays seem like mere sparks. The Lich King's power was immense, drawing on the collective death and suffering of millions of souls bound to his service. He summoned undead reinforcements that materialized from shadows and frost, ancient warriors and corrupted dragons that had fallen to his service over decades of conquest. But Vader had fought armies before, had stood alone against overwhelming odds, and emerged victorious through superior skill and unshakable will. He reached deep into the dark side, drawing on reserves of power he had rarely needed to access fully. The Force lightning intensified until it no longer resembled mere electricity, but became something closer to pure destruction, given visible form. It struck Frostmourne directly, and for the first time since its forging, the cursed blade began to crack. The souls trapped within it screamed as Vader's power disrupted the necromantic bindings that held them. Arthas felt genuine fear for the first time since donning the helm of domination. This outsider's power was not derived from Azeroth's established magical systems, which meant the Lich King's centuries of experience countering mages, paladins, and shamans provided no advantage. His enemy operated by completely different rules, wielding energies that his undead nature provided no inherent defense against. "What are you?" the Lich King demanded, his voice losing some of its confident resonance as Frostmourne's cracks spread wider. "I am what happens when darkness is mastered rather than merely embraced," Vader replied. His Force grip seized Arthas by the throat, lifting the Lich King off the ground despite his immense power and the weight of his armor. "You allowed your weapon to control you, to corrupt you into something less than you were. I shaped my darkness into a tool that serves my will absolutely. With a gesture, he tore Frostmourne from the Lich King's grasp and hurled it hundreds of meters away. The cursed blade embedded itself in Orgrimmar's outer wall, its connection to Arthas temporarily severed. In that moment of separation, the Lich King's power wavered dramatically as the souls bound to Frostmourne could no longer sustain him fully. Vader's lightsaber struck, carving through the Lich King's armor and finding the flesh beneath. Arthas staggered backward, dark blood flowing from wounds that should not have been possible for an undead being to sustain. But Vader's attacks were not merely physical. They carried the full weight of the dark side, disrupting the necromantic energies that sustained the Lich King's existence. "You cannot kill me," Arthas gasped, even as his power continued to fade. "I am bound to the frozen throne. Destroy me here, and I will simply reform in Northrend, stronger than before." "Perhaps," Vader acknowledged, "but your physical defeat here will shatter the Scourge's confidence and demonstrate to all of Azeroth that you are not invincible. Sometimes the psychological victory is worth more than permanent destruction." The final exchange was brief and devastating. Vader's Force lightning and lightsaber attacks came in a coordinated assault that the weakened Lich King could not counter. Arthas fell to his knees, his armor shattered, his connection to his armies disrupted. With a final Force push, Vader sent the Lich King's physical form hurtling back through the portal to Icecrown, banishing him back to his fortress in humiliating defeat. As the portal collapsed, silence fell across Orgrimmar. Every defender who had witnessed the battle stood in stunned awe. The Lich King, perhaps Azeroth's greatest single threat, had been defeated in single combat by this dark stranger. Not permanently destroyed, perhaps, but driven back in such decisive fashion that his aura of invincibility had been shattered. Vol'jin was the first to speak, his voice carrying a mixture of respect and apprehension. "You be defeating Manaroth and driving back the Lich King himself in the same day. Your power be beyond anything we anticipated, Lord Vader. The question now be what happens next." Vader surveyed the assembled Horde leadership, sensing their conflicted emotions through the Force. They respected his power, even feared it, but they also recognized opportunity. With someone of his capabilities fighting alongside them, threats that had seemed insurmountable suddenly appeared manageable. "What happens next," he stated, "is that you contact the Alliance leadership and arrange a meeting. It is time to end the pointless conflict between your factions and focus your combined strength on eliminating the true threats to this world." Jaina shook her head slowly. The Alliance will never agree to such a meeting, not hosted in Horde territory and especially not at the request of an unknown outsider. The mistrust runs too deep, the wounds too fresh. "Then we will give them something they cannot refuse," Vader replied. "A demonstration of what united action under proper leadership can accomplish. Lady Proudmoore, you mentioned the old gods remain imprisoned beneath Azeroth's surface. Take me to one of their prisons. I will show your people what focused power can achieve." The suggestion caused immediate uproar among the gathered leaders. Approaching an old god prison deliberately was considered suicide even for the most powerful champions. The ancient evil's corrupting influence could break minds and souls from vast distances, turning even the strongest warriors into gibbering madmen or willing servants of chaos. But Khadgar's voice cut through the protests via magical communication. "Actually, that might be exactly what we need. Cthulhu's prison in Selethis has been showing signs of renewed activity. The Cenarian Circle has been monitoring increased corruption spreading from the Temple of Ankh-Urash, and we've been discussing the need for a major expedition to assess and reinforce the wards. If Lord Vader truly believes he can help, this would be an ideal test of his capabilities and intentions." Vol'jin and Jaina exchanged long looks, an entire conversation passing between them in glances and subtle gestures. Finally, the war chief nodded slowly. "We be agreeing to this. but we're sending our best champions along, not just to help, but to bear witness to what happens. If you be as powerful as you seem, then this be your chance to prove it to both Horde and Alliance. Acceptable, Vader agreed. Assemble your champions. We leave within the hour. The journey to Silithus was accomplished through a combination of portal magic and mechanical transport, with Jaina coordinating the teleportation of multiple groups to the desert wastes simultaneously. Vader found himself traveling alongside an impressive collection of Azeroth's heroes and champions, representatives from both factions who had been rapidly assembled for this expedition. From the Horde came Vol'jin himself, accompanied by the legendary warrior Saurfang, the Blood Elf mage Ramath, and a Tauren shaman named Hamul Rune Totem, who radiated connection to the natural world. The Alliance contributed Jaina, the dwarf paladin Muradin Bronzebeard, the night elf priestess Tyrande Whisperwind, and a human warrior whose name was Varian Wrynn, the High King of the Alliance himself. Varian's presence was particularly significant, as it demonstrated the Alliance's recognition that whatever was happening with this outsider required the highest levels of attention. The king studied Vader with barely concealed hostility throughout the journey, his warrior's instincts clearly identifying the Dark Lord as a potential threat despite his actions against the Legion and Scourge. "I don't trust you," Varian stated bluntly as they materialized in Silithus. "Everything I've heard suggests you're powerful and effective, but also that you seek to impose your authority on Azeroth without regard for our existing governments or traditions. Give me one reason why I shouldn't consider you just another would-be conqueror." Vader's respirator cycled as he surveyed the corrupted landscape before them. Silithus was a wasteland of sand and twisted insectoid creatures, the ground itself showing signs of old god corruption despite the wards that had been in place for years. In the distance loomed the Temple of Ankh-Uraj, a massive structure of alien architecture from which emanated waves of malevolent presence. "Because conquerors seek only to dominate," Vader replied. "I seek to build. Your world has spent millennia in a defensive crouch, reacting to threats rather than eliminating them at their source. I will show you what becomes possible when power is wielded with proper vision and purpose." He began walking toward the temple, his cape billowing in the hot desert wind. The assembled champions followed, maintaining defensive formations and keeping weapons ready. As they approached, the whispers began, insidious thoughts that seemed to come from inside their own minds, promises of power and pleasure, suggestions that they could achieve their deepest desires if only they would surrender to the voices. Most of the champions had prepared for this, their minds shielded by magical protections or strengthened through years of spiritual discipline. But even prepared, they felt the pressure of Chthon's influence like weights pressing down on their consciousness. The old god's mere proximity was enough to test even the strongest wills. Vader felt the whispers too, but they slid off his mental defenses like water off ceramite armor. The dark side had tempered his mind through decades of discipline and control. He had already embraced darkness and mastered it. These whispers of corruption and power were pale shadows compared to what he already possessed. More than that, his connection to the Force allowed him to sense the structure of the old god's influence, the patterns through which it projected its corruption into susceptible minds. "Your defenses are impressive," came a voice that seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Chthon's consciousness pressed against reality from its prison deep beneath the temple. But even the strongest walls eventually crumble. "You think yourself immune to corruption, outsider. I have broken beings far older and more powerful than you. You mistake resistance for immunity," Vader replied, his mechanical voice echoing through the temple's corridors as the group descended into its depths. "I am not immune to darkness. I am its master. You offer corruption as if it were a gift, but I have already taken everything you could provide and forged it into something far greater." The temple's interior was a nightmare of organic architecture and impossible geometries. walls that seemed to breathe, and floors that shifted when not directly observed. The group fought their way through waves of corrupted insects and faceless ones, monstrous servants of the old gods that materialized from shadows and attacked with frenzied devotion. But with Vader leading the assault, the progress was steady and relentless. His lightsaber carved through corrupted flesh, while his force powers sent entire groups of enemies flying. More importantly, his presence seemed to shield the other champions from the worst of Chthon's mental assaults. The dark side created a bubble of ordered darkness around him that the old god's chaotic corruption could not easily penetrate. Jaina noticed this first, her magical senses detecting the protective effect. "He's actually shielding us from the whispers," she murmured to Tyrande. "I've never seen anything like it. Instead of just resisting the corruption, his power is actively deflecting it away from everyone near him." The Night Elf priestess nodded slowly, her ancient eyes seeing patterns that others might miss. "The darkness he wields is different from the old god's corruption. Theirs seeks to consume and transform. His seeks to dominate and control. In this place, control trumps chaos." They reached Chthon's prison chamber after hours of fighting through the temple's depths. The vast space was dominated by an enormous eye, easily 20 meters across, that floated in the center of a circle of dark energies. Tentacles thick as ancient trees writhed around the chamber's perimeter, and the very air was thick with corruption that made even breathing feel like an act of violation. At last, Chthon's voice boomed through the chamber, the eye's pupil focusing on Vader. "I see you truly, outsider. You carry such delicious darkness within you. Join me. Together, we could break free of this prison and reshape Azeroth into a perfect nightmare of order and chaos intertwined." "I do not require partners," Vader stated, advancing toward the eye with measured steps. "Least of all imprisoned horrors whose power peaked millennia ago." The insult provoked immediate reaction. Chthon's tentacles lashed out with speeds that defied their massive size, each one capable of crushing battle tanks. The eye opened wider, and from its center poured beams of shadow magic that corrupted everything they touched. The other champions scattered, taking defensive positions and beginning their own attacks against the old god's physical manifestation. But Vader stood his ground, his lightsaber a crimson blur as it severed tentacles while his force powers deflected the shadow beams. He began analyzing the structure of Chthon's prison, using the force to sense the wards and bindings that held the old god captive. The Titan's work was impressive, layers upon layers of containment that had held for thousands of years. But Vader could sense weaknesses, points where the bindings had degraded over time. Rather than attempting to destroy Chthon, likely impossible given the creature's nature as a fragment of something even more vast, Vader focused on reinforcing the prison itself. He reached out through the Force and began manipulating the ward structures, his power flowing into gaps and weak points, strengthening bindings and adding new layers of containment drawn from his understanding of both the Force and Azerothian magic. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Chthon's attacks weakened as more of its power was redirected into maintaining its connection to the material plane against the reinforced prison. The eye's movements became sluggish, the tentacles less coordinated. The old god's voice took on a note of genuine alarm. "What are you doing? This is not destruction. This is... You dare to strengthen my chains? You, who understand darkness, would imprison rather than liberate. Darkness without control is merely chaos," Vader replied, continuing his work. The other champions watched in awe as the corruption that had been spreading through the chamber began receding, pushed back by invisible forces. "I serve order, not entropy. Your existence serves no purpose but to spread madness and destruction. Better that you remain bound until a permanent solution can be found." With a final surge of power, Vader completed the ward reinforcement. Chthon's eye closed, its consciousness withdrawing deeper into imprisonment as the enhanced bindings cut it off from direct interaction with the surface world. The whispers that had plagued Silithus for years faded to barely audible murmurs. The corrupted insects throughout the region began dying as their connection to the old god was severed. Silence fell across the chamber, broken only by the heavy breathing of exhausted champions and the steady rhythm of mechanical respiration. Vader turned to face the assembled heroes, his cape settling around him as he extinguished his lightsaber. "This is what becomes possible with proper application of power," he stated. "Cthulhu has threatened Azeroth for millennia. Now it is contained more securely than ever before. Imagine what could be accomplished if this world's defenders worked in concert rather than opposition." Varian Rin stepped forward, his expression still skeptical but noticeably less hostile than before. "You've proven your power, Lord Vader, and your willingness to use it against Azeroth's enemies. But power alone doesn't make you someone we should follow. What assurance do we have that you won't become another threat we need to contain?" "None," Vader replied with characteristic bluntness. "You have only my actions and my word. I do not seek to rule through fear alone, as I once did in my own galaxy. I seek to build something lasting, an order that persists beyond my own existence, that requires willing cooperation from the strong, not merely the subservience of the weak." Tyrande spoke up, her voice carrying the weight of 10,000 years of experience. The words of a tyrant who has learned that tyranny alone is insufficient. But perhaps that wisdom, hard-earned though it may be, is what Azeroth needs. Our world has seen enough idealistic heroes who fall to corruption. Perhaps a realist who understands his own darkness might prove more reliable. Vol'jin nodded slowly. "The priestess speaks truth. I'd be more comfortable with a leader who knows his flaws than one who pretends to be without them. Lord Vader, the Horde be willing to discuss terms of cooperation, but we not be surrendering our autonomy or our honor." "I would expect nothing less," Vader replied. "True strength comes from unity of purpose, not uniformity of thought. The Horde will remain the Horde with its own traditions and leadership. What I offer is coordination at the strategic level, ensuring that Azeroth's defenders work together rather than at cross purposes." Jaina stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. "The Alliance will need more convincing, and there are other powers on Azeroth that will need to be consulted. The Dragon aspects, the Cenarian Circle, the Earthen Ring, all have their own interests and concerns. Then arrange meetings with them," Vader commanded. "I will make my case to each. Those who see the wisdom in cooperation will join us. Those who resist," he paused, his respirator cycling, "will be allowed to maintain their independence, provided they do not actively work against our efforts to secure this world." The group emerged from the Temple of Ankh-Kiraj to find that word of their success had already spread. Cenarion Circle druids, who had been monitoring the corruption, reported its dramatic recession, and magical researchers in Dalaran confirmed the strengthening of Shithun's prison wards. The achievement was being hailed as one of the most significant victories against the old gods in recorded history. But more importantly, the combined force of Horde and Alliance champions working alongside this mysterious outsider had accomplished something that neither faction could have achieved alone. The demonstration of what cooperation could achieve was impossible to ignore. Over the following weeks, Vader systematically met with Azeroth's various power structures, presenting his case for cooperation and demonstrating his value through action rather than mere words. He traveled to the Wormrest Temple and stood before the Dragon aspects, those ancient beings who had been empowered by the Titans themselves to watch over Azeroth. There, he engaged in philosophical discussions with Kalikos about the nature of power and responsibility, impressed even the skeptical Alexstrasza with his understanding of the necessity for both strength and wisdom, and earned grudging respect from Nozdormu by demonstrating that his vision extended beyond immediate concerns to long-term strategic planning. The meeting with the Cenarian Circle in Moonglade presented different challenges. The Druids were deeply suspicious of someone who wielded such obvious dark power. seeing it as antithetical to their beliefs in natural balance. But Vader countered by pointing out that darkness was itself a natural force, as much a part of existence as light. His reinforcement of Chiethin's prison had protected nature from corruption far more effectively than their cautious monitoring. Eventually, even the most rigid druids had to acknowledge that his methods, while unconventional, produced results. The Earthen Ring shamans proved more receptive, particularly after Vader demonstrated an understanding of their elemental philosophy. He explained the Force to them in terms they could comprehend, a universal energy that flowed through all things, neither inherently good nor evil, but shaped by the will of those who wielded it. The shamans recognized parallels with their own beliefs about the elements, and several offered to teach him their techniques in exchange for learning about his Force abilities. But the real test came when Vader traveled to Icecrown Citadel itself, accompanied by a strike force of champions from both factions. The Lich King had retreated to his fortress after his humiliation in Orgrimmar, and Vader intended to ensure that Arthas understood the new reality of Azeroth's power structure. The assault on Icecrown was brutal and unforgiving. The Scourge fought with desperate intensity, wave after wave of undead throwing themselves against the invaders. But with Vader leading the way, the advance was inexorable. His lightsaber carved through bone and frozen flesh. His Force powers cleared entire chambers of enemies, and his strategic brilliance allowed the strike force to bypass the Citadel's most dangerous defenses. They fought through the lower levels, past the plague works where the Scourge's most horrific experiments took place, up through the halls where fallen champions had been raised as Death Knights. They carved their way through the upper reaches where frost worms and lich lords commanded undead legions, until finally they stood before the frozen throne itself. Arthas waited for them there, fully recovered from his previous defeat, but noticeably changed. The Lich King's armor had been reforged, incorporating new defenses specifically designed to counter the energies Vader wielded. Frostmourne had been re-tempered, its curse deepened through sacrifices that had cost thousands of souls. The Helm of Domination pulsed with dark power as Arthas drew upon every resource available to him. "So you come to my stronghold," the Lich King's voice boomed across the frozen chamber. "Here, at the seat of my power, you think to challenge me again? Fool, you may have embarrassed me on foreign ground, but here I am supreme. Here, I am death incarnate." "You are still making the same mistake," Vader replied, his respirator cutting through the howling winds that swirled around the throne. "You believe your power comes from this place, from your throne and your cursed artifacts. But true power comes from within, from will that cannot be broken and purpose that cannot be corrupted." The battle that followed shook Icecrown Citadel to its foundations. Arthas fought with everything he had, Frostmourne singing through the air as he unleashed necromantic magic of apocalyptic proportions. The Lich King summoned every resource available to him. Undead champions rose from beneath the ice. Frost wyrms descended from the ceiling, and the very walls of the citadel came alive with deathly energies designed to drain the life from any living thing. But Vader had brought allies this time. Jaina's arcane magic countered the Lich King's frost spells, turning deadly blizzards into harmless snow flurries. Varian and Sarfang led the melee fighters against waves of undead reinforcements, their blades rising and falling with mechanical efficiency. Tyranda's holy light burned away corrupting energies, while Hammel's elemental magic prevented Arthas from drawing additional power from Icecrown's frozen environment. And through it all, Vader pressed his attack against the Lich King himself. His lightsaber met Frostmourne in exchanges that left scars across reality itself. His Force lightning battled Arthas's necromantic powers in displays that lit up the chamber like competing storms. His telekinetic might wrestled with the Lich King's control over the undead, each trying to dominate the battlefield through sheer force of will. The turning point came when Vader finally succeeded in shattering Frostmourne. The cursed blade had been weakened by their previous encounter, and the modifications Arthas had made in attempting to defend against force powers had introduced new structural vulnerabilities. When Vader's lightsaber struck at precisely the right angle with force-enhanced power behind it, the legendary sword exploded in a cascade of released souls and dark energy. Arthas staggered backward, suddenly vulnerable in ways he hadn't been since originally claiming the Helm of Domination. Without Frostmourne to channel and focus his powers, the Lich King was reduced to merely a very powerful Death Knight rather than the god of undeath he had styled himself. "This is over, Arthas," Vader stated, his lightsaber at the Lich King's throat. "You will submit to imprisonment or you will be destroyed. Choose." For a long moment, Arthas stared at the crimson blade, seeing his own defeat reflected in its glow. The man who had once been a paladin prince, who had slaughtered his own people to save them from plague, who had murdered his father and his mentor in his quest for power. That man looked at his conqueror and finally understood the difference between pursuing power and truly mastering it. "I will not submit," Arthas said quietly. "If this is to end, then end it cleanly. I have lived as a monster for too long. Better to die than to exist as a prisoner, forever reminded of what I became." Vader's respirator cycled as he considered the fallen king. Through the Force, he could sense the conflict within Arthas, the remnants of the paladin he had been struggling against the monster he had become. Unlike the Sith philosophy of total domination, Vader had learned through hard experience that some corruptions ran too deep to be controlled or redirected. "Very well," he said, and the lightsaber struck home. The Lich King's death sent shockwaves across Northrend and beyond. The Scourge, suddenly without the will that had directed their every action, began to collapse into mindless aggression or simple inactivity. The Death Knights who had retained some measure of free will found themselves suddenly liberated from the compulsion that had driven them. Throughout Azeroth, those who had lost loved ones to the Scourge felt a weight lift from their souls as the ultimate source of their pain was finally, permanently, removed. But Vader's action created an immediate crisis. The frozen throne could not remain empty. Without a Lich King to control them, the Scourge would run rampant. Billions of undead with no direction or purpose. Traditionally, someone would need to don the Helm of Domination and take up the burden of controlling the Scourge, sacrificing their freedom to save the world. Before anyone could volunteer, Vader reached out through the Force and seized the Helm of Domination. Every champion present shouted warnings as he lifted it toward his head, knowing that the artifact's curse would corrupt and control whoever wore it. But Vader had already analyzed the helm's structure through the Force, understood the mechanisms through which it dominated wills and bound minds. He placed it on his head, and for a moment, absolute silence fell across the chamber. The Helm of Domination attempted to assert its control, to crush Vader's will and remake him into a new Lich King. But it encountered a mind that had already embraced darkness, that had spent decades mastering the techniques of mental domination and resistance. More than that, it encountered the dark side of the Force, a power that operated by rules the Helm's creators had never anticipated. The struggle was brief and entirely one-sided. Vader's will proved far stronger than the Helm's compulsions. Within seconds, he had reversed the artifact's power structure. Instead of it controlling him, he controlled it. The Helm of Domination became just another tool in his arsenal, its power to command the undead now subject to his absolute authority. "The Scourge is contained," he announced, his voice now carrying harmonics from both his respirator and the helm. "They will remain in Northrend under my control, neither expanding nor attacking unless I specifically direct them. This threat to Azeroth is ended." The assembled champions stared in shock. What should have been impossible, donning the Helm of Domination without being corrupted by it, Vader had accomplished as if it were a minor inconvenience. Jaina's hands shook as she tried to process what she had just witnessed. You "You mastered the helm?" she whispered. "Just like that? Arthas spent years being slowly corrupted by it, and you simply took control?" "The helm's power is based on domination of will," Vader explained. "I have spent a lifetime learning to dominate and resist domination. This artifact is powerful, but it is still merely a tool, and tools exist to serve those strong enough to wield them." Varian stepped forward, his expression a mixture of respect and deep concern. "And what do you intend to do with an army of undead at your command, Lord Vader? The power you now wield could threaten all of Azeroth if you chose to use it that way." Vader removed the helm and held it before him, studying its dark craftsmanship. "I intend to do exactly what I said, contain them in Northrend as a deterrent against future threats. The Scourge will serve as a standing army that requires no food, no rest, and cannot be corrupted by enemies. They will be the ultimate reserve force, deployed only when Azeroth faces extinction-level threats." He extended the helm toward Varian. "If you doubt my intentions, destroy this now. I can maintain control over the Scourge temporarily through the Force alone, long enough to establish alternative containment measures. But keeping the helm intact provides better long-term control with less constant effort on my part." The offer hung in the air as Varian stared at the artifact. Here was a test. Would Vader truly relinquish such power if his supposed allies demanded it? Or was this merely theater, a gesture he knew they would not accept? After a long moment, Varian shook his head. "No, keep it. You've earned the right through combat and demonstrated control. But know that both Horde and Alliance will be watching. If the Scourge ever moves against the living unprovoked, this alliance ends immediately." "Acceptable," Vader replied, placing the helm back on his head. The artifact's dark presence settled around him like a second cape, visible to those sensitive to such things as an aura of absolute control over death itself. The return journey from Icecrown was triumphant. Word had spread across Azeroth. The Lich King was dead, the Scourge was contained, and it had all been accomplished through unprecedented cooperation between Horde and Alliance under the coordination of the mysterious outsider. Public opinion, both among the common people and the leadership, began shifting toward acceptance of Vader's proposed new order. But not everyone was pleased with these developments. In the Undercity, deep beneath Lordaeron's ruins, Sylvanas Windrunner watched reports of Vader's victories with calculating eyes. The Banshee Queen had her own plans for Azeroth's future, plans that required a careful balance of power between factions. This outsider's growing influence threatened to disrupt everything she had been building. In Stormwind's SI-7 headquarters, Master Matthias Shaw compiled intelligence reports on Vader with growing alarm. The Spy Master's network had gathered disturbing information. This being's power eclipsed that of any individual they had encountered. His influence was spreading rapidly through both military and political channels, and his ultimate goals remained opaque despite his stated intentions. And in Pandaria, the mysterious land hidden behind mists for 10,000 years, the Celestials felt the disturbance in Azeroth's fundamental energies. The balance that had been maintained for millennia was shifting, and they could not yet determine whether this change represented hope or catastrophe. But the most significant reaction came from beyond Azeroth entirely. Deep in the twisting nether, Kil'jaeden the Deceiver analyzed reports from Legion spies about the being who had eliminated Manaroth. The Eridar Lord's brilliant tactical mind immediately recognized the threat. Here was someone who could potentially unite Azeroth's defenders in ways that would make the world nearly impossible to conquer. The Legion's plans would need to be accelerated before this outsider consolidated too much power. In the throne room of Stormwind Keep, a summit had been called that brought together leaders from across Azeroth. King Varian represented the Alliance. Vol'jin spoke for the Horde. Representatives from the Dragonflights and the various circles attended, and Vader stood before them all to present his vision for Azeroth's future. For millennia, this world has lived in reactive mode, he began. his mechanical voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. You respond to threats as they emerge, but never address root causes. The Legion invades, you drive them back. The Scourge rises, you contain it. Old gods whisper, you resist. This cycle will continue until eventually, one of these threats succeeds in destroying everything. He activated a holographic display, a piece of technology he had constructed using Azerothian magical crystals combined with principles from his own galaxy. It showed Azeroth and the various threat vectors arrayed against it. I propose a different approach. The Legion's strength lies in its unity of purpose and unlimited resources across multiple worlds. You can counter this by creating your own unified command structure with clear chains of authority. The old gods derive power from division and madness. You neutralize them by maintaining psychological discipline and regular monitoring for corruption. The Scourge required constant attention to contain. I have already solved this problem by assuming direct control. Tyrande spoke up, her ancient voice carrying weight in the discussion. You speak of solutions, Lord Vader, but what you describe sounds very much like military dictatorship. Who decides what threats require attention? Who determines the allocation of resources? You? Initially, yes, Vader replied without hesitation. Because I am currently the only individual who combines the necessary power, strategic vision, and freedom from Azerothian political entanglements to make decisions based purely on effectiveness rather than faction loyalty. But this is not a permanent dictatorship. It is a transitional structure designed to last only until Azeroth's defenders can be properly organized and trained to function as a unified military force. Muradin Bronzebeard snorted skeptically. I've heard that before, lad. Just give me temporary absolute power and a promise to give it back once the crisis is over. It never works out that way. Because those who make such promises typically intend to keep the power from the beginning. Vader countered, I have no interest in ruling Azeroth permanently. I seek to build something that persists beyond my own involvement. That requires training a new generation of leaders who understand both the necessity of unity and the techniques required to maintain it. Ramath leaned forward, his blood elf features thoughtful. And what precisely would this new order look like? What authority would existing governments retain? Vader manipulated the holographic display, showing a proposed organizational structure. Each race maintains complete autonomy over internal affairs, culture, law, governance, all remain unchanged. What I propose is a supreme military command that coordinates defensive efforts across all of Azeroth. When threats emerge, this command would have the authority to deploy forces from any faction as needed, without requiring lengthy negotiations or political maneuvering. And who commands this military force? Varian asked, though he clearly already knew the answer. Initially, I do, Vader confirmed, but I will be training a council of war that includes representatives from each major faction. As they demonstrate competence in coordinated operations, authority will gradually transfer to them. My role will eventually reduce to advisory rather than command, unless circumstances require my direct intervention. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Every aspect of Vader's proposal was scrutinized, questioned, and argued over. Some saw it as the salvation Azeroth needed, a way to finally break the cycle of reactive defense and take proactive action against existential threats. Others viewed it as an unacceptable concentration of power in the hands of someone who, despite his demonstrated capabilities, remained fundamentally foreign to their world. In the end, it was Jaina who proposed the compromise that would move things forward. We pilot the program, she suggested. Lord Vader takes command of a joint task force composed of volunteers from both Horde and Alliance. This force operates under his authority for a trial period, say 6 months, during which they address one of our outstanding major threats. If the program proves successful and Lord Vader demonstrates he can be trusted with such authority, we expand it. If not, we dissolve the arrangement and return to our previous defensive structures. The proposal had the virtue of satisfying everyone partially while fully satisfying no one, the hallmark of a good compromise. After further discussion, both factions agreed to the trial. Vader would command a joint force called the Azeroth Defense Coalition, with a specific initial mission: eliminating the remainder of the Legion's presence in Outland and closing the dimensional rifts that allowed demons easy access to Azeroth. Over the following months, Vader threw himself into the task of training and organizing his new force. He selected volunteers carefully, choosing not just for combat ability, but for adaptability and willingness to work with former enemies. Orc warriors trained alongside human soldiers, learning to trust each other through shared hardship and common purpose. Blood Elf mages coordinated spells with Draenei Vindicators, discovering that their different approaches to magic could complement rather than conflict. Vader's training methods were harsh but fair, pushing every soldier to their absolute limits without regard for faction or species. A troll who complained about working with an Alliance member found himself sparring against that same individual until they both learned to appreciate each other's strengths. A human soldier who displayed prejudice against undead found herself partnered with a Forsaken warrior for every dangerous mission until she recognized competence over species. But more than just training, Vader taught his forces a completely new approach to warfare. He introduced them to the concept of combined arms tactics at a scale Azeroth had rarely seen, coordinating infantry, cavalry, artillery, and magical support into seamless offensive operations. He showed them how to use intelligence gathering and strategic planning to eliminate enemy advantages before battles even began. Most revolutionary, he demonstrated how a small, well-trained force operating with perfect coordination could achieve objectives that would require armies under traditional command structures. The assault on Outland was planned with meticulous precision. Vader spent weeks analyzing every scrap of intelligence about Legion positions in the shattered remains of Draenor, identifying key strongpoints and supply lines. He calculated exact force compositions needed for each objective, determined optimal routes of advance that would minimize casualties while maximizing operational surprise. By the time his forces deployed through the Dark Portal, every soldier knew their exact role and how it contributed to the overall mission. The campaign that followed showcased everything that made Vader's approach revolutionary. The Azeroth Defense Coalition struck Legion strongholds across Outland in coordinated assaults that left the demons reeling. Where previous expeditions had ground to bloody stalemates against fortified positions, Vader's forces used mobility and surprise to circumvent defenses entirely. Where other commanders would have accepted casualties as inevitable, Vader's planning minimized losses through superior tactics and overwhelming force concentration at decisive points. The climax came at the Black Temple, where Illidan Stormrage had established himself as a self-proclaimed Lord of Outland. The Demon Hunter had grown increasingly erratic and dangerous, his obsession with destroying the Legion driving him to methods that threatened innocent lives. Vader's force stormed the temple in a lightning assault that overwhelmed Illidan's defenders before they could organize effective resistance. The confrontation between Vader and Illidan was brief but intense. The Demon Hunter's fel-enhanced powers and combat experience made him one of the most dangerous individuals in Outland, but he had grown overconfident in his own abilities. When his demonic transformations in feel magic proved insufficient against Vader's force powers and lightsaber, Illidan found himself outmatched for the first time in years. "You fight darkness with darkness," Illidan gasped, felt blood streaming from wounds across his chest. "You think you're different from me, but we're the same. We do what's necessary, regardless of cost." "No," Vader replied, his respirator cycling. "You do what you believe is necessary while telling yourself the ends justify the means. I do what is actually necessary while accepting the cost without self-deception. That is the difference between us." The lightsaber's final strike removed Illidan's head, ending his threat to Outland permanently. With his death, the remaining Legion forces in the region lost their primary opposition. Illidan's armies had been containing the demons as much as fighting them. Now Vader's forces could systematically eliminate Legion strongholds without worrying about the demon hunters' unpredictable interference. The campaign concluded after 4 months of continuous operations. The Legion's presence in Outland had been reduced from an existential threat to scattered remnants easily contained by standard patrols. The dimensional rifts that had allowed demons easy access to Azeroth were sealed or heavily warded, and most significantly, the Azeroth Defense Coalition had proven that Horde and Alliance forces could work together effectively under proper leadership. The success of the Outland campaign silenced most of Vader's critics within Azeroth's leadership. Even those who distrusted his ultimate intentions had to acknowledge the results. The Legion threat had been neutralized more effectively than any previous expedition had managed, and it had been accomplished with relatively minimal casualties through superior planning and coordination. The trial period was extended indefinitely, with Vader's authority over the coalition formalized by both faction leaders. But success brought new challenges. As the coalition's reputation grew, more volunteers requested to join. Vader found himself needing to establish training facilities across Azeroth, developing standardized procedures and promotion criteria. He delegated authority to the most competent officers, creating a command structure that could function without his constant oversight. The organization was evolving from a temporary task force into something that resembled a permanent military institution. It was during this period of expansion that Vader encountered resistance from an unexpected quarter. The Dragon Aspects, particularly Ysera and Alexstrasza, requested a private meeting to discuss their concerns about his growing influence over Azeroth's defenders. The meeting took place at Wyrmrest Temple, with all 5 aspects present. Kalecgos spoke first, his mortal form barely containing the vast magical power of his draconic nature. Lord Vader, we have watched your rise with interest and some concern. Your accomplishments are undeniable, but the speed with which you've accumulated authority over Azeroth's military forces troubles us. The Titans charged us with watching over this world. We must ask, what are your ultimate intentions? Vader stood before the aspects without visible intimidation, despite facing beings who had existed for tens of thousands of years and wielded power that could reshape continents. My intention is to ensure Azeroth survives the threats arrayed against it. Nothing more, nothing less. Alexstrasza, the Lifebinder, studied him with ancient eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. We have heard such words before from Deathwing before his corruption became complete. He too claimed to be protecting Azeroth, right until the moment he tried to destroy it. Deathwing was corrupted by old god influence, Vader countered. I have already demonstrated my resistance to such corruption by reinforcing Shithun's prison rather than being tempted by its promises of power. If you doubt my intentions, examine my actions rather than comparing me to your fallen brother. Ysera, the Dreamer, spoke in her ethereal voice. Your actions are what concern us most. You accumulate power with disturbing efficiency. The military force you command now rivals the standing armies of both factions. You control the Scourge through the helm of domination. You have eliminated major threats across multiple fronts. This concentration of authority in a single individual, regardless of their intentions, represents a potential catastrophe if anything should go wrong, which is why I am systematically training others to share that authority. Vader replied, the Coalition's command structure is designed to persist beyond my involvement. Every decision I make is documented and explained so that future leaders can understand the reasoning behind it. I am not building a cult of personality. I am constructing an institution that will outlast me. Nozdormu, the Timeless One, had been silent throughout the discussion, but now he spoke with the weight of one who could see across temporal possibilities. I have looked into the timeways, Lord Vader, examined the various futures that might stem from your presence here. What I see is disturbing in its uncertainty. In some timelines, you are Azeroth's salvation, the leader who finally brings lasting peace and security. In others, you are its doom, a tyrant whose iron grip crushes everything we have built. The decision point that determines which future manifests has not yet occurred. Then judge me when that decision comes, Vader stated. Until then, I will continue working to secure this world against its enemies. If the aspects wish to assist in this endeavor, I welcome your cooperation. If you prefer to remain neutral observers, I respect that choice. But do not ask me to reduce my efforts simply because the future is uncertain. Uncertainty is the nature of existence itself. The aspects conferred among themselves telepathically, a discussion that took subjective hours despite occupying only seconds of objective time. Finally, Alexstrasza responded on their behalf. We will watch and wait. Lord Vader, your trial period is extended, but know that the aspects stand ready to intervene should you prove false to your stated intentions. We have lost one of our number to corruption already. We will not allow another threat to Azeroth to emerge unchallenged. I would expect nothing less. Vader replied, Vigilance is a virtue when dealing with power. I would be concerned if you simply accepted my word without verification. As Vader departed Wormrest Temple, he reflected on the meeting through the Force. The aspects were right to be cautious. He did represent a significant concentration of power that could threaten Azeroth if misused. But they also fundamentally misunderstood his nature. He was not accumulating power for its own sake, but as a means to an end. Once Azeroth's primary threats were neutralized and its defensive structures properly organized, he would have no further need to maintain such centralized authority. The question was whether he could accomplish those goals before opposition to his methods became overwhelming. Already, he sensed growing unease among certain factions. Sylvanas had been conspicuously absent from coalition activities, and intelligence reports suggested she was building up forces in the Undercity beyond what defensive needs would require. The SI-7 continued compiling reports on his activities, clearly preparing contingency plans in case he needed to be opposed. Even among his supporters, some worried about what would happen when the current crisis passed. These concerns crystallized into direct action during what became known as the Pandaria Crisis. The mysterious continent had recently revealed itself, its magical mists finally fading after 10,000 years of isolation. Both Horde and Alliance had immediately begun establishing footholds. Intentions had risen as old conflicts resumed on new ground. Then reports came of something called the Shah, manifestations of negative emotions that fed on conflict and corrupted those who encountered them. Vader recognized the threat immediately. These Shah were similar to dark side entities he had encountered in his previous life, beings that fed on negative emotions and grew stronger in environments of conflict and strife. Left unchecked in a land where Horde and Alliance were already establishing military presences, they would create a catastrophic feedback loop of violence and corruption. He ordered the coalition to deploy to Pandaria immediately, with strict instructions that both Horde and Alliance forces were to cease hostilities and focus on eliminating the Shah threat. This directive was deeply unpopular with both factions' leadership. Pandaria represented valuable territory and resources, and neither wanted to surrender potential advantage to the other. The crisis came to a head when Garrosh Hellscream, who had been quietly rebuilding his power base within the Horde, openly defied Vader's order. The former war chief declared that the Horde would not be dictated to by an outsider, that they would pursue their own interests in Pandaria, regardless of coalition directives. He rallied supporters who shared his belief that the Horde should prioritize its own strength over cooperation with the Alliance. Vader's response was swift and uncompromising. He personally traveled to Pandaria with a coalition strike force and confronted Garrosh in the Vale of Eternal Blossoms. The battle that followed was observed by champions from both factions, many of whom were uncertain which side they should support. Garrosh, empowered by Shah corruption and wielding the true Horde's might, proved to be a formidable opponent. His warriors fought with fanatical devotion, and he himself had grown even more powerful through his willingness to embrace whatever dark powers would grant him victory. But Vader had fought corrupted champions before, and he understood that Garrosh's greatest weakness was his own pride and rage. The duel demonstrated the difference between someone who wielded dark power and someone who mastered it. Garrosh fought with raw fury, his attacks devastating but ultimately predictable. Vader fought with cold calculation, his every move designed to exploit openings and create tactical advantages. When Garrosh attempted to channel Shah essence to enhance his power, Vader used Force Lightning to disrupt the connection, turning the corrupting energy back on itself. The final exchange was brutal. Vader disarmed Garrosh literally, his lightsaber severing the orc's weapon hand before a force push sent him crashing to the ground. Standing over the defeated warrior, Vader presented a choice. You can die here, a footnote in history remembered only for rebellion and corruption, or you can live and learn that strength without discipline is merely savagery. Choose. Garrosh, his pride broken but his life intact, chose to live. He was imprisoned and would eventually stand trial before both Horde and Alliance for his crimes. But more importantly, his defeat sent a message across Azeroth. Defiance of Coalition authority meant confronting Vader personally, and no one had yet proven capable of defeating him in direct combat. The message was received, but not universally welcomed. Many saw Vader's decisive action as necessary and appropriate. Garrosh had been about to trigger a war in Pandaria that would have empowered the Shah beyond containment, but others viewed it as evidence of creeping authoritarianism, proof that Vader would use force to suppress any opposition to his authority. The debate came to a head during an emergency summit in Dalaran. Leaders from across Azeroth gathered to discuss the fundamental question: should Vader's authority over the Coalition continue? And if so, what limitations should be placed on it? Tyrande spoke for those with concerns. Lord Vader has accomplished great things, this cannot be denied. But in accomplishing them, he has accumulated power that rivals that of kings in aspects. He commands armies, controls the Scourge, and has demonstrated willingness to use force against those who oppose him. At what point does the Guardian become the threat? Varian countered from a more pragmatic position. We are still facing existential dangers. The Legion's defeat in Outland was merely a temporary setback for them. They will return, stronger than before. The old gods remain imprisoned, but not destroyed. And new threats continue emerging faster than we can address them using traditional methods. Can we afford to limit the effectiveness of our most successful military leader simply because we fear what he might become? Muradin Bronzebeard offered a dwarf's blunt assessment. The real question isn't whether to trust Vader, it's whether we've got any alternative. Has anyone else got a plan for dealing with the Legion when they come back in force? Has anyone else figured out how to permanently neutralize Old God influence? Because I haven't heard any such plans, and until I do, seems to me we're better off with someone who actually gets results. The debate raged for hours, with positions hardening on both sides. Some called for Vader's authority to be reduced, for the Coalition to be restructured with more democratic oversight and limitations on any individual's power. Others argued that such restrictions would cripple the organization's effectiveness precisely when Azeroth needed it most. In the end, it was Khadgar who proposed a solution. Perhaps we're approaching this wrong. Rather than arguing about limiting Lord Vader's authority, we should be focusing on ensuring that authority cannot be abused. I propose we establish a council with representatives from each major faction and power group: Horde, Alliance, Dragon Aspects, the various circles, even representatives from Pandaria's August Celestials. This council would have oversight authority over Coalition operations, able to review decisions and raise concerns if actions seem to exceed defensive necessity. Vader, who had remained silent throughout most of the debate, finally spoke. Acceptable, provided the council understands that oversight does not mean micromanagement. Strategic decisions in combat situations cannot wait for committee approval, but regular review of policies and long-term strategic planning should absolutely involve multiple perspectives. The compromise was adopted, creating what became known as the Azeroth Defense Council. It provided a check on Vader's authority while maintaining the operational flexibility that had made the coalition so effective. More importantly, it demonstrated that Vader was willing to accept limitations on his power when they served legitimate purposes, a crucial signal to those who feared his growing authority. With the immediate political crisis resolved, Vader turned his attention to larger strategic concerns. His analysis of Azeroth's threats had revealed a disturbing pattern. Nearly every major danger the world faced could be traced back to the same source. The Burning Legion sought to consume Azeroth because it housed a slumbering world soul of immense power. The old gods had been sent by the Void Lord specifically to corrupt that world soul. Even the Scourge had originally been created by the Legion as a tool to weaken Azeroth before invasion. Everything came back to the Titans and their ancient enemies. Understanding this cosmic conflict was essential to truly securing Azeroth's future. Vader needed to learn more about the Titans themselves, about the world soul growing at Azeroth's core, and about the vast forces that viewed this single planet as a key battlefield in wars that spanned universes. He traveled to Oldham, where Titan facilities still functioned after millions of years. There, he studied ancient records and communed with the Titans' constructed servants, learning the deep history of Azeroth's creation and the cosmic significance it held. He meditated in the Chamber of Heart, feeling through the Force the pulse of the world's soul itself, a presence so vast and ancient that even the old gods seemed insignificant by comparison. What he learned changed his understanding of his role on Azeroth. He had come to this world by accident, drawn through dimensional rifts by forces he didn't fully understand. But now he recognized a pattern, a purpose to his arrival that transcended mere chance. Azeroth needed someone who understood cosmic-scale conflicts, who could think beyond planetary concerns to the universal stakes involved. Someone who had already learned the hard lessons about power, corruption, and the prices demanded by absolute authority. He was not here to conquer Azeroth. He was here to save it from forces that viewed entire worlds as mere game pieces in conflicts beyond mortal comprehension. And doing so would require more than just military victories. It would require fundamentally changing how Azeroth's defenders thought about their place in the universe. Vader returned from Oldham with a new sense of purpose and urgency. He called a meeting of the Defense Council and presented them with what he had learned about the cosmic stakes involved in Azeroth's survival. The revelation that their world housed a slumbering world soul that could become a new Titan shocked even the most knowledgeable among them. "This changes everything," Jaina said quietly, her hands trembling slightly as she processed the implications. If the Legion and the Void Lords are targeting Azeroth specifically because of the world's soul, then every battle we've fought has been part of a much larger conflict. We're not just defending our home, we're protecting something that could reshape the entire universe. Which is why your defensive posture must end, Vader stated. You cannot win a cosmic conflict by merely reacting to threats. You must take the initiative. Strike at your enemies before they can fully mobilize against you. The Legion operates from the twisting nether, coordinating invasions across countless worlds. That command structure must be disrupted or destroyed. Vol'jin leaned forward, his tusks gleaming in the council chamber's light. You'll be talking about taking the war to the Legion itself, invading the twisting nether and striking at their strongholds. Mon, that be suicide. No force from Azeroth has ever successfully conducted offensive operations in the Nether and returned intact. Because no force from Azeroth has ever had the coordination, training, and leadership that the Coalition now possesses, Vader countered. and because previous attempts were exploratory rather than strategic. I am not suggesting a blind assault into enemy territory. I am proposing a carefully planned campaign with specific objectives and clear extraction protocols. Khadgar studied the strategic projections Vader had prepared, his ancient eyes scanning tactical data that represented months of analysis. You've identified specific Legion command centers in the Nether, major summoning facilities that allow them to deploy forces across the universe. If we could destroy even a few of these, it would significantly degrade their ability to coordinate large-scale invasions. Exactly, Vader confirmed. But more than that, it would demonstrate to the Legion that Azeroth is no longer merely a target to be conquered. It would establish this world as a threat they must seriously respect, potentially deterring future invasions simply through demonstrated capability. The debate that followed was intense. Many council members were skeptical that such an audacious plan could succeed, while others worried about the casualties it would inevitably incur. But eventually, the combination of Vader's track record and the strategic logic of his arguments won enough support to approve a limited offensive operation. The raid on the Nether was planned with even greater precision than the Outland campaign. Vader personally selected every member of the strike force, choosing not just for combat ability, but for mental resilience. The Twisting Nether was a realm of pure chaos, where reality itself fluctuated according to no natural laws. Only those with absolute discipline and unshakable will could operate there effectively. The force that deployed through specially prepared dimensional portals was small but elite. 200 of the Coalition's finest warriors, mages, and specialists. They moved through the Nether like a surgical blade, striking at specific targets with overwhelming force before Legion reinforcements could arrive. Summoning centers were destroyed, command nexuses were obliterated, and several high-ranking demons were eliminated in coordinated ambushes. The crown jewel of the operation was the assault on a major Legion staging area where thousands of demons were being prepared for deployment to various worlds. Vader's force infiltrated the facility, placed powerful explosive charges at structural weak points, and evacuated just before detonating them. The resulting explosion destroyed the entire complex and eliminated Legion forces that would have been deployed against Azeroth and dozens of other worlds. The raid's success exceeded even optimistic projections. The Coalition lost only 12 soldiers in the operation, tragic but remarkably low considering the extreme danger involved. In exchange, they had dealt the Legion a blow that would take the demons decades to fully recover from. More importantly, the message had been sent. Azeroth could strike back. The Legion's response was swift and vindictive. Kil'jaeden himself began personally coordinating a massive invasion force, one that would dwarf all previous Legion attacks on Azeroth combined. Intelligence reports suggested that the demons were preparing to deploy their most powerful weapons, including massive demon lords who had not personally participated in combat for millennia. But Vader had anticipated this reaction. The raid on the Nether had been as much about gathering intelligence as inflicting damage. During the operation, his forces had captured detailed information about Legion command structures, force deployment patterns, and strategic planning. Now he knew when and where the next major invasion would occur. The Legion planned to open multiple portals simultaneously across Azeroth, splitting defensive forces and overwhelming them through sheer numbers. But Vader used the intercepted intelligence to predict portal locations with remarkable accuracy. He positioned Coalition forces to respond immediately, often arriving at invasion sites before the demons had fully established their beachheads. The resulting battles were some of the most intense Azeroth had ever witnessed. At Silithus, a massive demon army emerged from portals only to find themselves immediately engaged by Coalition forces who had prepared the battlefield specifically to counter their capabilities. In Winterspring, Legion aerial forces found themselves contested by coordinated efforts of dragonflights, griffin riders, and mages working in perfect synchronization. At the Broken Shore, naval landings by demon forces were repelled by a combined fleet that had been waiting in prepared positions. But the decisive battle occurred at the tomb of Sargeras itself, where Kil'jaeden attempted to manifest physically to lead the invasion. Vader had predicted this and assembled a strike force capable of confronting the powerful Eredar Lord. The battle raged across the tomb's ancient chambers. Kil'jaeden's millennia of experience and Fel-enhanced power matching against Vader's mastery of the Force and his coalition's coordinated tactics. The duel between Vader and Kil'jaeden was spectacular and terrifying in equal measure. The Eredar Lord wielded Fel magic of apocalyptic proportions, his spells capable of reshaping reality itself within the tomb's confines. Vader countered with Force powers refined over decades, his precision and control matching Kil'jaeden's raw power. Around them, coalition forces battled elite Legion champions in a struggle that would determine the fate of the entire invasion. The turning point came when Vader realized that Kil'jaeden's physical manifestation was being sustained by the same portals that had brought the Legion invasion force. He coordinated his forces to begin systematically closing those portals while maintaining pressure on Kil'jaeden himself. As each portal collapsed, the Eredar Lord's power waned incrementally, his connection to the twisting nether weakening. With a final combined assault, Vader's Force lightning striking in perfect synchronization with concentrated magical bombardment from every coalition mage present, Kil'jaeden's manifestation was destroyed. His essence was hurled back into the twisting nether, his body dissolved, and his invasion plans lay in ruins. The remaining Legion forces, suddenly without leadership or reinforcement, were systematically eliminated or driven back through their portals. The victory at the Tomb of Sargeras marked a turning point in Azeroth's history. For the first time, the world's defenders had not merely repelled a Legion invasion, but decisively defeated one of the demon's most powerful leaders in direct combat. The psychological impact was immense. Azeroth's various races began to believe that victory, true permanent victory over the Legion, might actually be possible. But Vader understood that one battle, however significant, did not win a war that had been raging for millions of years. The Legion would eventually recover in return, perhaps even stronger than before. The old gods still lurked in their prisons, always seeking opportunities to corrupt and destroy. New threats would inevitably emerge from the cosmic darkness that surrounded Azeroth. What had changed was Azeroth's capacity to respond to these threats. The Coalition had proven itself as an effective military force capable of coordinating complex operations across multiple fronts. The Defense Council provided oversight that prevented abuse of authority while maintaining operational effectiveness. Most importantly, former enemies had learned to work together, discovering that their combined strength exceeded what either could achieve alone. 1 year after his arrival on Azeroth, Vader stood once again in the Valley of Spirits in Orgrimmar. Zin-Tabura approached him as the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold that reminded him of different sunsets over different worlds in a galaxy far away. "The spirits say you be thinking of leaving," the shaman observed, settling beside him at the shrine. Not permanently, but stepping back from the day-to-day command. The Coalition be ready to stand on its own legs. Vader's respirator cycled as he considered her words. Through the Force, he had indeed been sensing that his direct involvement was becoming less necessary. The commanders he had trained were now making decisions that he would have made himself. The systems he had established were functioning smoothly without requiring his constant oversight. The Defense Council had evolved into an effective governing body that could provide strategic direction. The Coalition was always meant to persist beyond my direct involvement, he confirmed. "I came to this world by accident, but I will not remain as its permanent guardian. That role belongs to Azeroth's own people, who have earned the right to determine their own fate." But you not be leaving completely, Zentabra noted. The spirits see threads connecting you to this world now, bonds that cannot be easily broken. I will remain available when true crises emerge, Vader agreed. When threats appear that exceed the Coalition's normal capacity to address. But daily operations, strategic planning, resource allocation, all of this should flow from leaders who call Azeroth home. Over the following months, Vader gradually transferred authority to the Defense Council. He reduced his direct command role, instead serving as an advisor and strategic consultant. The Coalition's command structure evolved to rely less on his personal involvement and more on the systems and doctrines he had established. When threats emerged, Coalition forces responded effectively without waiting for his direct orders. But his legacy persisted in ways both obvious and subtle. The unified command structure he had created remained in place, continuing to coordinate Horde and Alliance military efforts, even as political tensions occasionally flared. The training methods he had introduced produced a new generation of warriors who understood combined arms tactics and the importance of interfactional cooperation. Most significantly, his example had proven that Azeroth's divided factions could work together effectively when properly led and motivated. The dragon aspects, who had watched his rise with such concern, found their fears partially allayed and partially confirmed. Vader had indeed concentrated enormous power, but he had used it to address genuine threats rather than to establish permanent tyranny. More importantly, he had demonstrated the discipline to step back from direct authority when his presence was no longer strictly necessary. Nozdormu, examining the timeways again, noted that the probability branches had shifted. Futures where Vader became a tyrant had diminished significantly, while those where he served as a recurring guardian had strengthened. Yet challenges remained. Sylvanas Windrunner had grown increasingly isolated and paranoid during Vader's rise to prominence, feeling her own power and influence diminished by the Coalition's success. She began pursuing dark experiments in the Undercity, seeking ways to extend her existence and control over death itself. Vader sensed these developments through the Force but chose not to intervene directly. This was an internal Horde matter, and he needed to demonstrate trust in Azeroth's leaders to handle their own problems. Similarly, tensions with the Void entities that opposed the light were growing more severe. Alleria Windrunner had returned from Outland, infused with Void energies, and her presence was attracting the attention of forces that viewed Azeroth as a battleground between fundamental cosmic principles. The conflicts between light and void threatened to draw Azeroth into wars that transcended physical reality itself. These challenges would require solutions, but they would be solutions developed and implemented by Azeroth's own people. Vader's role had evolved from commander to mentor, from director to advisor. He had given this world the tools and training it needed to face cosmic threats on equal footing. What they chose to do with those tools would determine their ultimate fate. In a private conversation with Vol'jin, the war chief expressed his complicated feelings about Vader's impact on their world. You came here as an outsider, stranger to our ways and our history. Many of us feared you, worried that you would become another tyrant seeking to bend Azeroth to your will. And in truth, you did seek to reshape our world, but not through tyranny. Through teaching us that we be stronger together than divided. The lesson was always here, Vader replied. I merely demonstrated it with sufficient clarity that even the most stubborn could not ignore it. Your world's greatest weakness was your inability to set aside old grievances when facing existential threats. That weakness has been addressed, though not eliminated. Old habits die hard, and conflicts will inevitably arise again. But when they do arise, we now be having the Coalition and the Defense Council to manage them, Vol'jin noted. Structures that force us to work together even when we not be wanting to. You gave us that. I gave you nothing, Vader stated. I showed you what you already possessed but were too divided to recognize. The strength was always yours. You simply needed someone to demonstrate how to properly wield it. In Stormwind, Varian Rin hosted a formal ceremony honoring Vader's service to both Horde and Alliance. The Human King's words were carefully chosen, acknowledging the outsider's contributions while also subtly establishing that Azeroth's people would now chart their own course. Lord Vader came to our world at a time of crisis, and through his actions, he helped us overcome threats that might otherwise have destroyed us. He taught us to fight together, to set aside our differences when facing common enemies, and to think strategically about our place in the cosmos. For these lessons and these victories, we are grateful. But more than gratitude, we offer respect. For someone who wielded immense power and chose to use it to strengthen others rather than to dominate them. The ceremony was attended by representatives from every major faction and power group on Azeroth. Dragon aspects flew overhead in honor of the occasion. The Cenarian Circle sent druids who blessed the gathering. Even the Pandaren August Celestials manifested briefly to acknowledge Vader's role in protecting Pandaria from Shah corruption and preventing a war that would have devastated their homeland. But perhaps the most significant moment came when Jaina Proudmoore, who had initially opposed Vader's presence most vocally, stepped forward to speak. "I will not pretend that I trusted you from the beginning, Lord Vader. I saw your power and feared what you might do with it. I worried that we were replacing one threat with another, solving immediate problems while creating larger ones for the future. I was wrong." She paused, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "You were not wrong to fear," Vader replied, his mechanical voice cutting through the silence. "Power should always be viewed with caution, and authority should always be questioned. Your skepticism forced me to prove myself through actions rather than words, to demonstrate that my intentions matched my stated goals. Without that pressure, I might have taken shortcuts that would have ultimately failed. Your doubt made me better at what I needed to accomplish." The acknowledgement of her role brought unexpected emotion to Jaina's face. Few powerful beings would admit that criticism had improved them, and fewer still would thank their critics publicly for providing it. The gesture demonstrated something that had perhaps been Vader's most important lesson. True strength lay not in the ability to crush opposition, but in the wisdom to learn from it. As the ceremony concluded and dignitaries began departing, Vader found himself approached by a young human warrior, barely more than a boy, really, but wearing the tabard of the Coalition with obvious pride. The youth saluted with military precision that would have been impossible for Azerothian forces before Vader's training methods had been implemented. "Lord Vader, sir, I wanted to thank you. My father died fighting the Scourge. My mother was killed in a Legion raid. I hated the Horde because orcs destroyed my village when I was young. But you showed me that hatred was making me weak, that my enemies weren't the Horde but the forces that threatened everyone. Now I fight alongside orcs and trolls, and I'm stronger for it. We all are." Vader studied the young warrior through the Force, sensing the sincerity in his words and the transformation he represented. This soldier was one of thousands who had learned to set aside prejudices and old grievances, who had discovered that unity produced better results than division. He was the Coalition's true legacy, not the victories over demons and undead, but the changed hearts and minds that would persist long after those battles were forgotten. "Continue to grow stronger," Vader commanded, "and when you lead others, remember that true strength comes from unity of purpose, not uniformity of belief. The Coalition will face challenges that I cannot predict or prepare you for. Meet them with the same adaptability and determination you have shown thus far." The young warrior saluted again and departed, leaving Vader alone with his thoughts. Through the Force, he could sense the vast web of connections he had forged during his time on Azeroth. Commanders he had trained, structures he had established, doctrines he had written into the Coalition's institutional memory. These connections would persist, even after he stepped back from direct involvement, anchoring him to this world in ways both subtle and profound. He thought about his previous life, about the empire he had helped build, and the atrocities committed in the name of order. That empire had been built on fear and maintained through brutality, and it had ultimately collapsed because such foundations proved insufficient to sustain galactic civilization. Here on Azeroth, he had built something different. Not perfect, certainly, and perhaps not permanent, but better than what had come before. The Coalition would face its trials. Internal conflicts would strain the bonds between factions. External threats would test their coordination and resolve. Some of what he had built might fail, might be rejected or reformed by those who came after. But the core lesson, that divided defenders would always fall to united enemies, that lesson had been learned too thoroughly to be completely forgotten. As he departed Stormwind through one of the city's gates, Vader paused to look back at the human capital. The setting sun cast long shadows across its white stone towers, and he could see both Horde and Alliance banners flying together over Coalition facilities throughout the city. It was an image that would have been unthinkable before his arrival, a testament to how much had changed in just over a year. Zentabra's words echoed in his mind, bonds that could not be easily broken. She was right. He would not, could not, completely sever his connection to this world. When truly catastrophic threats emerged, when the Coalition faced challenges beyond their capacity to overcome, he would return. But that role, that occasional intervention during crises, was far different from the day-to-day command authority he had initially wielded. He had come to Azeroth by accident, drawn through dimensional rifts by forces beyond his understanding. But he would leave by choice, having given this world the tools it needed to forge its own destiny. Whether that destiny led to triumph or tragedy would depend on the people of Azeroth themselves, on whether they could maintain the unity he had helped establish and build upon the foundations he had laid. The Force showed him glimpses of possible futures, timelines where the Coalition grew stronger and eventually secured lasting peace, others where old conflicts reasserted themselves and Azeroth fell to forces that a united defense might have defeated, and still others where new threats emerged that required adaptations he could not predict. The future remained uncertain, as it always would be, but uncertainty was not weakness. It was the nature of existence itself, the price paid for free will and genuine choice. He had given Azeroth's defenders the tools and training they needed. What they chose to do with those gifts would be their decision, their responsibility, their triumph or their failure. As Darth Vader walked into the gathering darkness, his cape billowing behind him and his respirator maintaining its steady rhythm, he felt something he had rarely experienced in either of his lives. Satisfaction with work well done. Not perfection, not ultimate victory over all possible threats, but meaningful progress toward a better future. The Age of Division was ending on Azeroth. What would rise from its ashes remained to be seen. But for the first time in millennia, this world had a genuine chance to determine its own fate rather than merely reacting to threats imposed from outside. That chance, that possibility, was worth the effort he had invested. And if that chance was squandered, if Azeroth's defenders fell back into old patterns and allowed their world to be conquered by forces they could have united to defeat, well, he would deal with that failure when and if it came. For now, he had given them everything he could. The rest was up to them. The galaxy had changed, but the fundamental truths of power remained constant. The strong guided, the weak followed. And those who understood darkness could sometimes use it to prevent even greater darkness from consuming everything. Vader had learned these lessons through suffering and loss. Now Azeroth would have the opportunity to learn them through victory and hope. It was, he reflected, a far better education than his own had been. In the years that followed, the Azeroth Defense Coalition would face challenges that tested everything Vader had taught them. They would suffer defeats and celebrate victories, adapt and evolve, occasionally stumble but always recover. The structures he had established would be modified, improved, occasionally nearly abandoned before being recommitted to with renewed vigor. And through it all, in the darkest moments when catastrophe seemed inevitable, A black armored figure would sometimes appear on the battlefield. His lightsaber would ignite with its characteristic snap hiss. His respirator's rhythm would cut through the chaos of combat, and Azeroth's enemies would learn once again why this world could not be conquered, could not be corrupted, could not be destroyed. Because Azeroth had found a guardian who understood that darkness, properly mastered, could serve the light, and that lesson, once learned, could never be entirely forgotten. The end of one chapter, the beginning of countless others. And through them all, the steady breathing of a mechanical guardian, watching from the shadows, ready to intervene when needed but content to let others shine in the light. Azeroth had been saved not through conquest, but through education, not through tyranny, but through demonstrated possibility, and that ultimately was the legacy of Darth Vader's time in World of Warcraft. The proof that even the darkest beings could find redemption through service to something greater than themselves.